Hello friends, welcome to Legacy of Thrones. Most animals eat what the world gives them. Raw flesh, hard roots, bitter leaves, cold and unchanged. Humans did something stranger. Long before cities, writing, or metal, our ancestors began to place food into fire and wait for it to become something softer, warmer, and easier than nature had made it. That quiet habit may have altered the body, the day, and the path of our species. But if fire was visible to many animals, why are humans the only animals that cook food? For most of the history of life on Earth, eating has been a very simple act. An animal finds food, and it consumes it in the form the environment provides. Leaves are eaten as leaves. Flesh is eaten as flesh. Seeds are crushed. Insects are swallowed. Roots are gnawed from the soil. Across forests, grasslands, oceans, and deserts, the pattern is remarkably consistent. Food is taken directly from the world and eaten with very little transformation. This pattern is so widespread that it forms one of the quiet background rules of animal life. The environment produces matter, and bodies are built to process it exactly as it appears. In this sense, eating is not only a behavior, but also a relationship between body and landscape. The structure of teeth, the strength of jaws, the length of intestines, and the chemistry of digestion all reflect the kinds of food that organisms encounter in their surroundings. A grazing animal spends hours each day breaking down tough plant fibers. A predator tears through muscle and connective tissue with teeth shaped for cutting. Many birds swallow seeds whole and rely on internal grinding organs to process them later. Even insects follow similar patterns, consuming plant tissue, nectar, or other small animals in forms that closely resemble their natural state. When one observes the living world from this perspective, a simple pattern becomes visible. Bodies are built to match raw environments. The hardness of a nut, the toughness of raw meat, the bitterness of wild leaves, or the fibrous texture of roots are not obstacles to animals. They are simply the conditions around which evolution has shaped physical systems over long spans of time. Because of this, animals rarely need to change the structure of food before eating it. Instead, the body itself performs the work. Teeth crush, saliva softens, stomach acids dissolve, and microbes assist in breaking down the remaining material. These internal processes function as a biological extension of the environment. The transformation of food happens inside the body rather than outside of it. Across millions of years, this arrangement has proven stable for nearly every species that walks, swims, or flies. When a deer lowers its head into grass, the plant is not altered before it is eaten. When a wolf catches prey, the flesh is not modified before consumption. Even highly intelligent animals follow this pattern. Primates gather fruits and leaves. Birds crack shells. Some species wash or manipulate food, but the fundamental structure of the food remains largely unchanged. The world presents matter in a raw state, and animal bodies are designed to meet it there. Seen from a wide evolutionary perspective, this relationship between raw environments and biological digestion appears almost universal. Yet, the human story sits slightly outside this pattern. At some point in deep human history, the relationship between food and body began to shift. Instead of relying entirely on teeth, stomach acids, and long hours of chewing, early humans gradually began to place food near heat. This did not simply warm the food. Heat could soften plant fibers, loosen connective tissue, and change the texture of many materials that had previously required intense physical effort to consume. In effect, part of the digestive process moved outside the body and into the surrounding environment. What had once happened only inside stomachs began to occur in the open air, near controlled fire. This shift is subtle but unusual when viewed across the animal kingdom. Most creatures evolved bodies capable of handling raw food directly. Humans, however, developed a habit that allowed food to be transformed before it ever reached the mouth. This small difference raises a deeper question about the long path of human life. If nearly every animal species relies on bodies designed for raw environments, how did one species come to rely on food that had already been changed by heat before the first bite was taken? Across the living world, eating raw food is not a limitation, but a design principle. The bodies of animals have been shaped over immense spans of evolutionary time to meet the world exactly as it is. Teeth grind through fibrous plants. Jaws tear through muscle. Stomach acids dissolve tissues, and complex communities of microbes assist in breaking down substances that would otherwise remain inaccessible. In many species, this work requires long hours each day. A grazing animal may spend much of its waking life chewing and reweeing plant material. Certain primates devote large portions of their time to gathering and processing fruits, leaves, and stems that must be chewed carefully before swallowing. Even predators often struggle with tough connective tissues and bones that demand forceful biting and persistent tearing. This pattern reveals something important about the relationship between bodies and environments. Instead of altering food before eating it, animals have evolved bodies capable of performing the transformation internally. The mouth begins the process. The stomach continues it, and the intestines complete it. The body itself functions as a moving system of mechanical and chemical processing. In this sense, digestion is the animal kingdom's primary tool for changing food. The transformation happens inside living tissue rather than outside it. When observing animals in natural environments, one rarely sees them attempting to reshape food in advance of eating. A chimpanzee may peel the skin from fruit, a bird may crack open a shell, and some animals rinse or manipulate food in water. Yet these actions remain relatively small adjustments compared with what heat can do. The essential structure of the food remains raw. Muscle fibers stay firm, plant cell walls remain intact, and the chemical composition of the material is largely unchanged before it enters the digestive system. Because of this, the physical demands of eating raw food are often substantial. Raw plant fibers resist breakdown. Tough animal tissues require repeated chewing. Even foods that appear soft may contain compounds that are difficult to digest without extended processing inside the body. For many animals, time spent eating is therefore one of the dominant rhythms of daily life. Hours pass slowly as teeth grind, jaws move, and digestive systems begin their long internal work. The landscape, the body, and the passage of time are closely linked through this continuous act of processing raw material. When viewed across the broad spectrum of species, this arrangement seems almost universal. Environments present food in one state, and bodies are built to handle that state directly. The physical effort required to eat is accepted as part of existence. In contrast, the human approach to food eventually followed a slightly different path. Instead of relying entirely on the body's mechanical and chemical abilities, humans began to use elements of the environment itself to perform some of the work beforehand. Fire, once controlled and maintained, offered a way to change the physical structure of food before it entered the mouth. Plant fibers could soften, animal tissues could loosen, and many materials could become easier to chew. This meant that part of the effort normally carried out by teeth and stomachs could occur outside the body in the surrounding space near heat. The shift may appear small at first glance, yet when placed against the background of animal life, it represents a quiet departure from the usual relationship between organism and environment. Instead of evolving bodies capable of handling increasingly tough raw materials, humans gradually developed a habit of altering those materials in advance. The body still digests the food, but the first stage of transformation no longer belongs entirely to biology. It begins in the world outside the body, near fire, before the first bite is taken. Within the long history of life, that simple change raises a deeper puzzle. If the natural design of animal bodies has always been to process raw environments directly, why did one species begin to move part of that process outside the body and into the fire before eating? Seen from a distance, the act of eating raw food appears almost effortless in the animal world. A grazing herd moves slowly across open land, lowering their heads again and again toward the ground. Birds pick seeds from dry soil. Primates search through branches for fruit and leaves. Each species seems comfortable with the materials provided by its environment. Yet, this apparent ease hides a great amount of biological effort occurring inside the body. Raw foods are often structurally complex. Plants are reinforced by strong cell walls designed to resist damage. Animal tissues are supported by networks of connective fibers that hold muscles together. Seeds are protected by shells meant to survive harsh conditions before sprouting. These structures evolved to endure the pressures of nature, and they are not easily broken down. To meet these challenges, animal bodies developed powerful internal systems. Teeth act as the first mechanical tools. Some animals possess wide, grinding surfaces for crushing plant matter, while others have sharp edges capable of slicing through muscle. Saliva begins softening material and preparing it for digestion. Once swallowed, food enters stomachs filled with acidic fluids capable of dissolving tissues and neutralizing many natural defenses present in plants and animals. Beyond the stomach, long intestinal passages continue the process through chemical reactions and assistance from microscopic organisms that help dismantle complex molecules. This entire sequence forms a biological strategy that has supported animal life for immense periods of time. The world offers raw materials, and bodies transform those materials internally. Because of this, the effort required to consume raw food becomes a central rhythm in daily life. Many animals must dedicate a large portion of their waking hours simply to gathering and processing food with their bodies. Grazing species often move slowly for much of the day, while chewing plant fibers that resist quick digestion. Certain primates spend long stretches of time breaking down leaves or tough fruit skins with repeated bites. Even predators may struggle with resistant tendons or bones that require persistent force before swallowing. In these cases, eating is not a brief activity, but a steady physical task. Time passes alongside the repeated motion of jaws and the slow work of digestion. When one considers this pattern across the wider landscape of life, a quiet consistency emerges. Animals adapt themselves to the raw state of the environment, rather than altering the environment first. Evolution adjusts bodies over generations so that teeth, stomachs, and intestines match the foods available in surrounding habitats. From this perspective, the boundary between organism and environment remains stable. The world produces food, and bodies respond to it as it appears. The relationship between the two is direct. Within this broad pattern, the human path gradually introduced a different approach. Instead of adjusting only the body to meet the environment, humans began to change certain elements of the environment before eating. Fire, once controlled and maintained, allowed heat to interact with food in ways that softened its structure. Fibrous plants could loosen. Tough animal tissues could become easier to tear apart. Materials that once demanded extended chewing might require less effort after exposure to warmth. When food undergoes this kind of change before it reaches the mouth, the balance between body and environment subtly shifts. The digestive process no longer begins entirely inside the body. Some of the transformation occurs outside it, in the surrounding space where heat is present. Compared with the long history of raw eating across the animal kingdom, this development is unusual. It suggests that human survival eventually depended not only on biological structures, but also on learned interactions with natural forces, such as fire. Yet even with this difference, the deeper question remains unresolved. Fire has existed in the natural world long before humans appeared. Lightning strikes forests. Volcanic landscapes release heat, and many animals have encountered these phenomena throughout history. If heat has always been present in nature, and if many species are capable of learning and manipulating objects in their environment, why did the habit of cooking become a consistent part of human life, while remaining almost absent among other animals? Across many landscapes of the world, the act of eating is closely tied to the physical structure of food itself. Plants grow with rigid frameworks that help them stand upright toward light. Fibers run through stems and leaves, forming networks that resist tearing. Animal bodies contain muscles bound together by connective tissues that provide strength and flexibility. These structures are essential for life, Yet they also create obstacles for any creature attempting to eat them. Raw food is rarely soft by design. It is built to survive in nature, not to dissolve easily in the mouth of another organism. Because of this, animals that depend on raw diets must rely on bodies capable of meeting these cultural challenges directly. Teeth are the first tools in this interaction. Some species possess flat surfaces, suited for crushing seeds and grinding plants into smaller fragments. Others carry pointed teeth that puncture skin and slice through muscle fibers. The shapes of these teeth vary widely across species, yet they all serve the same purpose: to reduce the physical strength of raw materials before they travel deeper into the digestive system. The jaw, moving rhythmically over long periods of time, becomes a central instrument in this process. In many animals, the movement of chewing continues for hours each day, slowly breaking down materials that resist quick consumption. Once swallowed, food encounters a second stage of transformation. The stomach provides a chemical environment capable of dissolving tissues and weakening structures that survive the work of the teeth. Acids and enzymes interact with the food, gradually separating complex molecules into simpler forms that the body can absorb. In some species, specialized digestive chambers host communities of microorganisms that assist in dismantling plant fibers or other resistant substances. These internal systems function together as a living laboratory, where raw materials are slowly converted into usable energy. From this perspective, digestion can be understood as a biological strategy for dealing with the hardness and complexity of the natural world. The environment produces structures designed for survival, and animal bodies evolve the capacity to break those structures apart from within. This arrangement has shaped daily rhythms across countless species. Animals must dedicate time and energy to gathering food and then processing it internally, through chewing, digestion, and absorption. The act of eating becomes intertwined with movement, rest, and the gradual passage of the day. Many grazing animals walk slowly while feeding, their jaws moving steadily as they process large quantities of plant matter. Certain primates sit quietly while chewing leaves or fruits that demand careful breakdown before swallowing. Even predators, after capturing prey, may spend considerable time tearing through tough tissues before their stomachs begin the longer chemical work of digestion. In each of these cases, the body performs nearly all of the transformation required to make raw materials usable. Against this broad biological background, the human relationship with food gradually followed a somewhat different direction. Humans did not entirely abandon the internal processes shared by other animals. Teeth still chew, and stomach acids still dissolve tissues. Yet, humans also developed the habit of exposing food to heat before eating it. When food encounters sustained warmth, many of the structures that once resisted digestion begin to loosen. Plant fibers can soften, and connective tissues within animal meat may weaken. These changes alter the texture of the food before it reaches the mouth. Instead of confronting the full strength of raw materials, the body receives substances that have already undergone a stage of transformation outside the digestive system. In this sense, cooking shifts a portion of the digestive effort away from the body and into the surrounding environment. Heat becomes an external partner in preparing food for consumption. Compared with the long-standing pattern of raw diets across the animal kingdom, this adjustment represents a notable departure from the usual biological arrangement. The body no longer carries the entire burden of breaking down natural structures. Some of that work occurs before eating even begins. Observing this difference raises an important curiosity about the human story. If most animals rely entirely on their internal systems to overcome the structural challenges of raw food, what conditions allowed humans to move part of that process outside the body and into the fire that warmed their surroundings? Among animals, the raw diet is not only common, it also shapes the scale and pace of everyday life. When food remains hard, fibrous, resistant, or chemically demanding, the body must respond with time. This is one of the quiet costs of eating in the natural state. A creature may survive perfectly well on raw food, but survival often requires hours of chewing, long digestive passages, or specialized internal systems that continue working long after the meal has been swallowed. In this way, diet does not only shape anatomy, it also shapes the rhythm of the day. A large grazing animal may spend much of its waking life with its head lowered, collecting plant matter in slow repetition. The food may seem abundant, yet each mouthful contains structural barriers that require patience. Grass is rich in fiber, but that fiber is difficult to access quickly. Leaves may be everywhere, but their tissues are built to hold form, resist damage, and continue living under sun and wind. Even fruits, which seem softer and easier, often carry skins, seeds, or chemical defenses that limit how simply they can be consumed. Predators live under a different set of conditions, yet they also face the raw state of nature directly. Flesh is softer than wood or leaf fiber, but it is still part of a body built for strength. Muscle is held together by connective tissue. Skin resists tearing. Tendons stretch and bind. Bones protect and support. A successful hunt may look sudden, but eating the animal is another matter. The body of the predator must cut, tear, crush, and swallow materials that were not made to come apart easily. Once the meal enters the stomach, acids and enzymes continue a task that teeth alone cannot finish. This long internal labor is one of the central facts of raw diets across the animal kingdom. The world offers food in forms shaped for life, and other creatures must adapt themselves to those forms, rather than changing them first. From this perspective, the natural condition of food is not softness or convenience. It is structure, it is resistance. It is matter still carrying the design of the plant or animal it once belonged to. That is why so much biological energy must be spent on chewing, digesting, fermenting, and absorbing. The body becomes the place where hardness is slowly translated into nourishment. This helps explain why so many animals are defined by digestive specialization. Some carry multiple stomach chambers, some depend heavily on gut microbes. Some must eat almost continuously. The raw diet does not merely fill the body, it organizes the body. It shapes the jaw, the teeth, the stomach, the intestine, and the daily timetable of survival. Against that deep background, the human relationship with food begins to look unusual in a more specific way. Cooking is not merely about taste. It is not simply a cultural decoration added to an otherwise ordinary meal. It changes the timing of labor between food and body. When heat softens a root, weakens plant tissue, or loosens the structure of meat, some of the work that would normally be done by the jaw and stomach has already begun before eating starts. In other words, cooking changes where effort happens. Instead of locating nearly all of the burden inside the digestive system, humans can move part of that burden into the surrounding environment. Fire becomes a place where the structure of food starts to yield. This does not remove digestion, but it changes its starting point. Compared with the rest of animal life, that is a remarkable shift. It suggests that humans did not simply inherit a diet from nature and meet it with anatomy alone. They gradually created a new relationship between food, time, and biological effort. And once that relationship appeared, it may have affected not only what humans ate, but how long they had to eat, how much effort they needed to spend, and how the body itself adapted across generations. If raw food had always demanded so much time and internal labor from living creatures, what happened when one species found a way to begin that labor outside the body in the quiet heat of creation? In the natural world, raw food places quiet but persistent demands on the body. These demands are not always obvious at first glance. A plant may appear soft when held in the hand, and fresh meat may seem easy to bite into. Yet beneath these surfaces lie structures that evolve to resist damage, maintain stability, and survive the pressures of the environment. Plant tissues are reinforced by rigid cell walls that help stems stand upright, and leaves hold their shape under wind and sun. Inside animal bodies, muscles are woven together with fibers that allow movement while preserving strength. These structural features are essential for life, but they also mean that raw food often arrives in forms that resist rapid digestion. For animals that rely entirely on raw diets, the body must solve this problem through physical and chemical effort. Teeth break the first barrier by reducing food into smaller fragments. In species that consume plants, wide grinding surfaces press repeatedly against tough fibers, slowly weakening them with each movement of the jaw. In species that consume other animals, sharper teeth cut and tear through tissue that holds muscle and skin together. This process is rarely quick. Even foods that eventually become easy to swallow may require extended chewing before they can safely enter the digestive system. The mouth, therefore, acts as the first stage of mechanical processing, converting large and minimally-resistant materials into forms that the stomach can handle more effectively. Once food moves deeper into the body, a second stage begins. The stomach introduces acids and enzymes capable of dissolving proteins and weakening other complex structures. The environment inside the stomach is carefully balanced so that tissues break down while the body itself remains protected. After this stage, partially digested material continues through the intestines where additional enzymes and microbial partners assist in extracting energy and nutrients. In many animals, this internal system is long and elaborate because raw food requires time and space for full digestion. Plant fibers may resist chemical breakdown and must be fermented by microorganisms that specialize in dismantling them. Proteins and fats must be separated into smaller components before they can pass through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream. These processes happen quietly and slowly, often continuing long after the visible act of eating has ended. For this reason, the structure of an animal's digestive system often reveals the nature of its diet. Species that rely heavily on plants frequently possess long digestive tracts or specialized chambers where microbes assist in breaking down cellulose. Species that consume meat may have shorter digestive systems but stronger stomach acids, capable of dissolving animal tissues more quickly. In both cases, the body itself carries the responsibility of transforming raw matter into usable nourishment. Evolution adjusts anatomy over many generations so that internal systems match the demands of the surrounding environment. This arrangement, repeated across countless species, represents the usual solution to the challenge of eating. The world offers food in forms shaped by nature, and the body evolves to overcome those forms through chewing, digestion, and chemical breakdown. When placed within this broader biological context, the human relationship with food appears unusual. Humans still possess teeth, stomach acids, and digestive enzymes similar to those found in other mammals. Yet, humans also regularly expose food to heat before eating it. Heat can soften plant cell walls, weaken connective tissues in meat, and alter the texture of many foods that would otherwise demand extensive chewing. This means that some of the structural barriers normally confronted by the mouth and stomach may already be reduced before the first bite is taken. As a result, cooking subtly redistributes the work of digestion. Instead of beginning entirely inside the body, part of the transformation begins outside it, in the warmth of fire seen against the long history of raw diets in the animal kingdom. This shift raises an intriguing question. If the bodies of animals evolved to manage raw food through internal systems alone, what does it mean for a species to begin changing the structure of food before the body ever touches it? The body of an animal reveals much about the kind of food it must confront in the environment. Teeth, jaws, stomach chemistry, and the length of the digestive tract are not random features. They are shaped slowly through generations, so that each species can handle the materials available around it. When the food is tough, bodies evolve strength and endurance. When the food is difficult to break down chemically, digestive systems grow more complex. In this way, anatomy becomes a record of the long relationship between living organisms and the raw world that feeds them. Among mammals that rely heavily on plants, the demands of raw food are especially clear. Plant tissues contain cellulose, a substance that provides structural support but is resistant to digestion by many animals. To overcome this barrier, some species have developed digestive chambers where microorganisms assist in dismantling plant fibers. These microbes perform chemical work that the animal's own enzymes cannot easily complete. The result is a slow collaboration between body and microbial life, turning hard plant structures into energy over extended periods of time. Other plant-eating animals follow a different path. Instead of relying primarily on internal fermentation, they depend on constant chewing. Their jaws move in steady, repeated motions that grind plant matter into smaller fragments, gradually weakening the fibers that hold the material together. This mechanical effort often occupies large portions of the day. The animal continues chewing, not only while eating, but sometimes long after the meal has been gathered, allowing the digestive system to work more effectively on the reduced material. Predators face a different challenge, yet their bodies also reveal adaptation to raw food. Meat contains dense networks of muscle fibers and connective tissues that resist quick breakdown. Carnivorous mammals often possess sharp teeth capable of slicing through flesh and separating tissues from bone. Their stomach acids tend to be strong enough to dissolve animal proteins and weaken structures that survive the work of the teeth. The digestive tract may be shorter than that of plant eaters, yet it remains highly specialized for processing the materials found in prey. These examples illustrate a general principle across the animal kingdom. When food arrives in a raw state, evolution modifies the body so that the organism can deal with it directly. Teeth become tools for grinding or cutting. Digestive organs become environments where chemical reactions slowly dismantle complex structures. Microbial partners develop inside the body to assist in breaking down materials that would otherwise resist digestion. Over time, the body itself becomes the place where the transformation of food takes place. The natural state of eating, therefore, is not merely about swallowing food. It involves a long chain of physical and chemical work performed within living tissue. The environment presents food in forms shaped by survival, and organisms adapt themselves to handle those forms without altering them beforehand. In this sense, the digestive system functions as the animal kingdom's primary technology for dealing with the complexity of raw matter. When considering humans within this larger biological pattern, a subtle tension appears. Human anatomy still carries many features common to other mammals. The teeth can chew, the stomach produces acids, and the intestines absorb nutrients in familiar ways. Yet, the human body does not appear to rely as heavily on the extreme adaptations seen in some other species that live entirely on raw diets. Human teeth are smaller than those of many primates that depend heavily on tough plant materials. The digestive tract is not as specialized for fermentation as that of certain plant-eating mammals. These observations do not provide a complete answer, but they hint at an interesting possibility. Instead of evolving ever more powerful internal systems to confront raw food directly, humans may have gradually relied on a different strategy. If heat could soften fibers, loosen tissues, and make food easier to break apart, then the body would not need to carry the entire burden of processing raw materials alone. Cooking could begin part of the digestive work before the food entered the mouth. When viewed in this light, cooking does not simply modify food, it may also alter the evolutionary pressures placed on the human body itself. If some of the difficulty of raw food is removed by heat, the anatomy of the eater may slowly reflect that change over time. This possibility leads naturally to another question about the human body. If cooking became part of the human relationship with food, how might that habit have influenced the shape and structure of the body that depends on it? The human body carries quiet traces of the long relationship between food and survival. Teeth, jaws, and the digestive tract all reveal something about the kinds of materials that a species has regularly consumed. When these structures are compared across mammals, a pattern begins to emerge. Animals that depend heavily on tough plant fibers often possess large, grinding teeth and powerful jaws, capable of enduring repeated chewing. Their digestive systems may include complex chambers where microorganisms assist in dismantling cellulose, allowing energy to be extracted from materials that would otherwise pass through the body unchanged. In contrast, animals that rely primarily on meat tend to have sharp teeth designed for cutting and tearing, along with digestive systems suited to breaking down animal proteins and fats. Each body reflects the demands of its diet. Against this background, the human body appears somewhat unusual. Human teeth are neither specialized for constant grinding of fibrous plants, nor sharply adapted for tearing through raw flesh. The jaw muscles are relatively moderate in strength compared with some other primates. The digestive tract also occupies a middle ground, lacking the extensive fermentation chambers seen in certain plant-eating mammals, while still maintaining the chemical tools needed to process a wide variety of foods. This combination suggests a body that is flexible, rather than strongly specialized, for one particular raw diet. Such flexibility has long been an advantage for humans living in changing environments. Early human communities likely encountered many different food sources depending on climate, landscape, and season. Roots, fruits, leaves, seeds, insects, and animal tissues could all appear in varying amounts. A body capable of digesting many types of food would have been valuable in such conditions. Yet flexibility alone does not remove the physical challenges of raw materials. Tough plant tissues still resist chewing. Connective tissues in meat still demand effort from teeth and stomach acids. If early humans relied entirely on raw food, the body would still face the same structural barriers that shape the diets of other animals. This is where the presence of controlled fire introduces an intriguing shift. Heat has the ability to alter the physical structure of many foods before they enter the body. Plant cell walls may soften when exposed to sustained warmth. Starches can change in ways that make them easier to digest. The connective tissues that hold muscles together may loosen, allowing meat to separate more readily under the pressure of teeth. None of these changes eliminate the need for digestion, but they can reduce the effort required at the earlier stages of eating. The mouth encounters food that has already begun to yield. In this sense, cooking begins the transformation of food outside the body. The digestive system still performs its essential work, yet the first barriers presented by raw structures may be partially lowered. Over time, this shift could influence how the human body interacts with its diet. If food regularly arrives in a softened or altered form, the evolutionary pressure to develop extremely powerful chewing muscles or highly specialized digestive chambers may be reduced. The body may remain capable of processing raw materials when necessary, but it may no longer need to carry the full burden of that task alone. This idea does not imply a single moment when humans suddenly change their biology. Evolution moves slowly across many generations. Habits form gradually, environments shift, and bodies adapt over long periods of time. Yet the regular use of heat to prepare food could create subtle differences in how the human body balances the work of digestion between internal biology and external preparation. When viewed within the broader context of the animal kingdom, this possibility becomes particularly interesting. Most animals rely entirely on their anatomy to overcome the challenges of raw food. Humans, by contrast, may have developed a habit that allowed part of that challenge to be addressed before eating even began. If cooking could alter the balance between body and environment in this way, the next question becomes difficult to ignore. At what point in human history did fire become a consistent presence in daily life? And how did people first learn to keep it close enough to food that heat could quietly begin the work of digestion? Long before cities, metal tools, or written language appeared, fire was already present in the natural world. Lightning strikes could ignite dry grasslands. Forests sometimes burn during long periods without rain. In volcanic landscapes, heat could escape from the earth itself. These events were unpredictable and often destructive. Yet, they were also part of the natural environment encountered by many animals. Fire was not something humans invented. It existed long before the human lineage appeared. What changed in the human story was not the existence of fire, but the gradual ability to remain near it, observe it, and eventually maintain it. In the early stages of human history, fire was likely encountered as a natural phenomenon rather than a controlled tool. A wildfire might pass through a landscape, leaving behind charred ground and smoldering wood. After the flames faded, warmth could linger in the remaining embers. For a group of early humans moving through such an environment, these glowing remains would have been difficult to ignore. Heat radiates into the surrounding air, Light extends into the darkness. The smell of burned vegetation and animals spreads through the landscape. These sensory signals make fire one of the most noticeable events in nature. Unlike many other environmental forces, fire changes the atmosphere around it in ways that are visible, audible, and warm to the skin. Even without understanding its full behavior, early humans could observe its effects. The ground becomes cleared of dense vegetation. Some animals flee the flames, while others remain behind, unable to escape. Plant structures weaken under heat, and certain materials soften as they burn or smolder. None of these observations require complex explanation. They are direct experiences available to any creature that encounters a burned landscape. For animals moving through such areas, the changes produced by fire may have briefly altered the availability and condition of food. Plants damaged by heat could become softer. Insects might gather around charred wood. The bodies of animals caught in fire might be found in altered states compared with freshly killed prey. These conditions would not have occurred regularly, yet they could appear often enough across generations to become familiar features of certain environments. For humans, whose survival depended on careful attention to surroundings, such changes may have held particular interest. Over time, the presence of fire in natural landscapes could shift from being a purely destructive event to something that was cautiously approached and observed. At some point in this long history, early humans began to do more than simply encounter fire after lightning or volcanic activity. Evidence from archaeological sites suggests that human groups eventually learned to preserve small flames or glowing embers for extended periods. Instead of waiting for the next natural wildfire, they could carry fire with them or maintain it within a specific location. This step represents a profound change in the relationship between humans and a natural force. Fire was no longer just an event. It became a presence that could remain within a camp or gathering place. Maintaining fire required attention. Fuel had to be added. Embers had to be protected from wind and rain. The flame had to be kept alive through the night. These activities transformed fire from a temporary occurrence into something woven into the rhythms of daily life. Warmth could be extended beyond the moment of a passing wildfire. Light could reach into the darkness after sunset. The space around a fire became a point where people gathered, rested, and interacted. Yet even at this stage, fire did not automatically imply cooking. The earliest importance of fire may have been warmth, protection, and light, rather than the preparation of food. When fire became a steady presence in human environments, it created new possibilities that had not existed before. Heat was now available not only during rare natural events, but during ordinary moments of life. Once fire could be maintained intentionally, its influence on human behavior began to expand. The warmth of flames and embers could touch many aspects of daily activity. Among those possibilities, one stands out as particularly significant for the human relationship with food. When heat remains nearby for long periods of time, the materials placed close to it cannot remain unchanged. The structure of food begins to respond to the warmth of fire long before it reaches the mouth. If humans learn to keep fire alive within their living spaces, how did that steady presence of heat begin to influence the way food was handled, prepared, and eventually eaten? Fire changes the environment in ways that few other natural forces can. When flames pass through a landscape, they leave behind more than charred wood and darkened soil. The air becomes warmer, the ground becomes open, and many materials that once held their structure begin to soften or break apart. Plants that once stood firm may collapse under heat. Insects emerge from damaged bark. The bodies of animals that did not escape the flames may lie altered by the warmth that passed over them. These changes are temporary, yet they create moments in which the structure of the natural world becomes different from what it was before. For creatures moving through such landscapes, the results of fire are visible long after the flames disappear. Early humans, like other animals, would have encountered these environments from time to time. A burned field or forest is not silent. The ground carries the smell of smoke. The surface of wood may still hold warmth. Ash settles lightly over the soil, and new spaces appear where dense vegetation once stood. Such places might attract attention simply because they differ from the surrounding landscape. In these spaces, the condition of plants and animals is no longer the same as it was before the fire passed through. Materials that were once rigid may become brittle. Tissues that were once firm may soften. These transformations do not require deliberate action. They happen naturally when heat interacts with organic matter. For a long period of human history, encounters with fire were likely limited to these kinds of events. Lightning could ignite dry vegetation during storms, and volcanic activity could release heat from the earth. Flames would appear suddenly and disappear once their fuel was consumed. Humans living in these environments could observe the effects of fire, but had little control over when or where it occurred. The heat would come and go according to the rhythms of weather and landscape. Yet, repeated encounters with these events could slowly build familiarity. When a burned landscape revealed animals whose bodies had changed under heat, or plants whose structures had softened, the difference between raw and heated material would become visible. Even without intention, the contrast between the two states could be noticed. Raw tissues resist the teeth in one way, while tissues exposed to warmth may yield differently under pressure. Such observations do not require complex knowledge. They arise simply from experience with the environment. Over many generations, the ability to remain near fire gradually changed this relationship. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups eventually learn not only to approach fire, but also to keep it alive beyond the moment of a natural blaze. A small flame or a cluster of glowing embers could be preserved and protected. Dry branches or plant materials could be added to sustain the heat. When fire was maintained in this way, it stopped being a brief event and became a lasting feature of a living space. This development transformed the human environment in subtle but important ways. A fire that continues burning through the evening produces steady warmth. It casts light that reaches beyond the fading daylight. It creates a central place where people can remain during the cooler hours of night. The area around the fire becomes calmer and more predictable than the dark spaces beyond it. These conditions encourage people to gather in one place for longer periods of time. When fire remains present in daily life, it inevitably begins to interact with the materials that surround it. Wood dries and cracks in the warmth. Water warms in containers placed nearby. Plant materials left close to the flame slowly change in texture. If pieces of food come near the heat, they cannot remain exactly as they were before. Even without deliberate planning, warmth alters the structure of organic matter. Fibers loosen, moisture evaporates, and tissues begin to transform. The presence of a controlled fire therefore creates a new possibility in the relationship between humans and food. Instead of encountering heat only in rare natural events, humans could now experience its effects whenever a flame was maintained nearby. The environment around the fire became a place where the state of food could change before it was eaten. When heat remained within the living space of early humans, how did that quiet and steady warmth begin to influence the way food was treated, shared, and eventually prepared for the first bite? When fire began to remain within human living spaces, the environment around it quietly changed. A steady flame creates a small circle of warmth that stands apart from the cooler air beyond it. Light reaches into the darkness after the sun has disappeared, revealing faces, tools, and the ground beneath one's feet. Wood placed near the fire dries and cracks. Moist materials slowly release vapor into the air. The ground close to the flames becomes a place where heat lingers even after the fire itself settles into glowing embers. These changes may seem simple, yet they alter the rhythm of daily life in ways that few other natural forces can. For early human communities, the ability to remain near fire meant that certain activities could continue beyond daylight. Darkness no longer forced an immediate retreat into stillness. The glow of embers created a space where people could gather, rest, and remain aware of their surroundings. In such conditions, the fire became more than a source of warmth. It became a center around which people organized their presence in the landscape. The ground near the fire offered visibility and comfort, while the shadows beyond it remained uncertain and cold. Over time, This small circle of warmth and light may have encouraged repeated patterns of gathering. People would return to the same place where embers were preserved, and flames could be rekindled, fuel had to be collected, branches arranged, and ashes cleared. These simple actions formed routines that connected human attention with the maintenance of fire. In this way, fire slowly shifted from a rare environmental event to a familiar companion within the human environment. Whenever a flame remains present for long periods, the objects placed nearby inevitably respond to heat. Stones warm slowly in the firelight. Water held in containers becomes warmer as it rests near the embers. Plant materials dry and change texture as moisture escapes. These transformations occur without intention. Heat moves outward from the flame and interacts with whatever lies within its reach. Food, when brought close to that warmth, cannot remain unchanged. Pieces of plant matter placed near a fire begin to soften as their internal structures respond to heat. Fibers that once held firm gradually loosen. Animal tissues exposed to warmth can separate more easily when pressed between the teeth. The difference may first appear subtle, but the change in texture becomes noticeable through touch and chewing. The body encounters food that yields more readily than it would in its raw state. These observations do not require deliberate experimentation. They emerge naturally whenever heat and organic materials share the same space. If early humans spent long evenings gathered around a fire, the presence of warmth would inevitably influence the condition of the things brought near it. Food collected during the day might rest beside the flames as people sat and spoke. Over time, repeated exposure to heat could reveal that certain foods became easier to chew after being warmed. The structure of the food itself would quietly communicate this difference. In this sense, cooking may not have begun as a sudden invention. It may have emerged gradually from simple interactions between heat, food, and the repeated human habit of gathering around fire. As flames and embers remained present in everyday life, they created an environment where the transformation of food could happen naturally within reach of the human hand. Once this possibility appeared, the relationship between fire and food could begin to deepen. If warmth softened materials and made them easier to chew, and placing food intentionally closer to heat might slowly become part of ordinary practice, the quiet presence of fire would then influence not only comfort and light, but also the way people approach the act of eating itself. When heat began to touch food regularly in human living spaces, what kinds of changes did it weigh? And food first before the first bite was ever taken. Heat has a quiet but powerful effect on the structure of food. When organic materials are exposed to warmth, the internal arrangements that give them strength begin to shift. These changes are not dramatic explosions or sudden transformations. They occur gradually, often invisible at first, yet they alter the way food responds to pressure from teeth and the chemistry of digestion inside the body. Understanding this process begins with the structure of plants. Much of the firmness found in roots, stems, and leaves comes from microscopic walls that surround plant cells. These walls are built from strong compounds that allow plants to stand upright, resist wind, and maintain shape while growing towards sunlight. For animals that eat plants in their raw state, these structures present a mechanical challenge. Teeth must grind repeatedly to break them apart, and digestive systems must rely on chemical reactions and microbial partners to dismantle what chewing cannot fully destroy. When heat enters this process, the structure of plant tissue begins to change. Warmth weakens the rigid networks that hold cell walls together. Moisture trapped within the plant expands and moves, causing the tissue to soften. Fibers that once resisted pressure may begin to separate, allowing the material to yield more easily when bitten or chewed. These changes do not remove the plant's nutritional content. Instead, they alter the physical barriers that once protected it. As those barriers loosen, the body can reach the stored energy inside the plant more easily. Similar processes occur within animal tissues. Muscle is composed of long fibers held together by networks of connective material. These fibers give living animals the strength to move and support their bodies. In raw meat, The same structures that allow movement also resist quick breakdown during eating. Teeth must work to tear the fibers apart, and digestion must continue dismantling the tissues after swallowing. Heat changes the behavior of these structures as well. When exposed to warmth, proteins inside muscle fibers begin to shift their arrangement. Connective tissues that once held the fibers tightly together gradually weaken. The result is a texture that separates more readily when pressed or bitten. This is why meat exposed to sustained heat often becomes easier to chew than the same tissue in its raw condition. These transformations occur through natural interactions between temperature and biological materials. No special tools are required beyond the presence of warmth itself. When food rests near fire, the energy from heat moves slowly into the material. The molecules that form plant fibers and animal proteins respond to that energy by changing the way they hold together. As a result, the physical effort required to break apart the food may decrease before it ever reaches the mouth. In this sense, heat performs part of the work that teeth and stomach acids would otherwise need to complete. From a biological perspective, this shift is significant. The body remains responsible for digestion, but the starting condition of the food has already been altered. Plant tissues that once resisted chewing may become softer. Animal fibers that once demanded tearing may begin to separate more easily. These changes influence how much effort the body must invest in processing a meal. When viewed against the long history of raw diets in the animal kingdom, the presence of heat introduces a different pathway through which food becomes accessible to the body. Instead of relying solely on anatomical strength and chemical digestion, humans could allow the environment itself to begin weakening the structures that once resisted consumption. Over time, this simple interaction between heat and food could reshape the relationship between the eater and the material being eaten. If warmth could quietly soften the barriers that once protected the energy inside plants and animals, how might that change the amount of work required from the human body during the act of eating? Heat does more than soften the outer structure of food. It also influences how the body later interacts with the material during digestion. When raw food enters the mouth, the body begins a process that must overcome many layers of physical and chemical resistance. Fibers must be broken, proteins must be unfolded, and stored energy must be separated from the structures that once protected it. This work normally takes time and effort, and in many animals, the digestive system has evolved to manage these challenges slowly and steadily. When food is exposed to heat before eating, some of these early barriers begin to weaken. In plant foods, warmth can cause certain internal compounds to absorb water and expand. Structures that once held tightly together may loosen, allowing the food to break apart more easily when pressure is applied. This does not mean the plant loses its nutrients. Instead, the energy stored within the plant becomes more accessible because the surrounding structures are no longer as resistant. In animal tissues, heat affects the proteins that form muscle and connective material. Proteins are long chains of molecules folded into specific shapes. These shapes give tissues their strength and flexibility while the animal is alive. When exposed to heat, the arrangement of these molecules begins to change. The tightly folded structures can loosen and unfold, which alters the texture of the tissue. This change allows muscle fibers to separate more easily, making the material less resistant to chewing and digestion. The result of these changes is not simply softer food, it is food that has already begun to move through a stage of transformation before it enters the body. Teeth still perform their mechanical role, and the stomach still carries out chemical digestion. Yet the starting point of the process has shifted. Instead of confronting fully intact raw structures, the body receives materials that have already been partially altered by temperature. This adjustment can influence the amount of effort required from the mouth and digestive system. If plant fibers have loosened and animal tissues have weakened, the force needed to break them apart may decrease. The stomach may encounter proteins that are already unfolded and therefore easier to break down chemically. Digestion still occurs, but the path toward releasing energy becomes less physically demanding at the beginning of the process. From an evolutionary perspective, this shift may hold particular significance. In the natural world, energy is one of the most important resources any organism must secure. Every movement, every heartbeat, and every thought depends on the body's ability to obtain energy from food. If a method exists that allows the body to access that energy with less effort, the consequences may reach far beyond a single meal. Over long periods of time, changes in how energy is obtained can influence the balance between feeding effort and other activities. Cooking, by altering the structure of food before digestion begins, introduces such a possibility. It allows part of the work required to unlock energy to occur outside the body through the simple presence of heat. When heat begins the transformation of food in this way, the relationship between eater and environment changes slightly. Fire becomes more than a source of warmth or light. It becomes a place where the physical barriers surrounding nutrients can begin to yield before the act of eating even starts. Over time, this subtle shift could influence how much time is spent chewing, how efficiently energy is absorbed, and how the body allocates effort between digestion and other functions. Yet, even with these possibilities, an important question remains. If heat can alter the structure of food and make certain nutrients easier to reach, what evidence exists in the traces of ancient human life that this process truly became part of everyday behavior? Heat not only alters the texture of food, it also changes how the body encounters the energy stored inside it. In the natural state of many plants and animals, nutrients are protected by structures that evolved for survival rather than for consumption. Seeds carry strong outer layers designed to shield the embryo within. Plant tissues contain fibers that help stems and leaves resist damage from wind or grazing. Animal muscles are bound together by connective materials that allow movement while preserving strength. These protective features are essential for life in the wild, yet they also make raw food difficult to process quickly. When food is eaten without any prior transformation, the body must work through these barriers step by step. Teeth grind or tear the material into smaller pieces. Saliva begins the first chemical interactions. The stomach introduces acids that weaken proteins and other compounds. Digestion then continues through the intestines, where enzymes and microorganisms help extract nutrients from the remaining fragments. This chain of events is effective, but it requires time and energy. In animals that rely completely on raw diets, digestion often continues long after the meal itself has ended. Heat changes the beginning of this sequence. When food is exposed to sustained warmth, certain barriers that protect nutrients begin to break down before the food ever reaches the mouth. Plant cell walls soften as their rigid structures weaken under temperature. Starches inside many plants absorb water and change form, allowing digestive enzymes to reach them more easily later. In animal tissues, the proteins that give muscle its firmness begin to unfold and lose some of their original strength. These changes alter the way food behaves under pressure and during digestion. Instead of confronting tightly organized structures, the body receives materials whose internal arrangements have already shifted. As a result, chewing may require less force, and digestive enzymes may reach nutrients with fewer obstacles. The transformation caused by heat does not replace digestion, but it can shorten the distance between food and the energy stored within it. From the perspective of biology, this difference is subtle but meaningful. The digestive system is designed to extract energy from complex structures, yet those structures normally resist rapid breakdown. If heat reduces that resistance before the food enters the body, the work required to release nutrients may change over many meals and many generations. Even small changes in how energy becomes available could influence the balance between feeding effort and other biological demands. The presence of heat, therefore, introduces a new step in the relationship between food and the body. In most animals, the environment provides raw materials, and the body performs all of the transformation internally. In humans who cook food, part of that transformation occurs before the first bite. The fire begins the process that teeth and stomach acids will later continue. This shift moves a portion of the digestive effort into the surrounding environment where warmth quietly alters the structure of food over time. When seen across the long history of animal life, this arrangement is unusual. It suggests that humans do not rely solely on anatomy to deal with the challenges of raw food. Instead, they interact with natural forces such as heat to change those challenges before eating begins. The body still digests, but the starting condition of the meal is no longer entirely raw. As heat reshapes the barriers around nutrients, the relationship between human bodies and the foods they consume begins to follow a slightly different path from that of other animals. Yet, understanding this biological change raises another question that moves beyond the chemistry of food itself. If cooking can alter the structure of plants and animal tissues in ways that influence digestion, what traces of this practice remain in the material evidence left behind by early human communities? The story of cooking does not appear only in the structure of food or in the biology of digestion. It also leaves traces in the material remains of ancient human life. Long after fires have burned out and meals have been eaten, certain marks can remain in the ground, in stone, and in the fragments of plants and animals that once passed through human hands. These traces form part of the evidence that researchers study when trying to understand how early humans interacted with fire and food. Unlike bones or stone tools, the direct evidence of cooking can be difficult to preserve. Organic materials break down over time, and the heat that transforms food may also destroy delicate structures that would otherwise survive in the archaeological record. Even so, repeated human use of fire leaves recognizable signs. Ash layers accumulate in places where flames burned again and again. Charred fragments of wood remain embedded in soil long after the fire itself has vanished. Stones placed near heat sometimes crack or change color under repeated exposure to high temperatures. These patterns allow archaeologists to recognize places where fires were maintained by human activity rather than by brief natural events. In some ancient sites, the ground reveals circular or concentrated areas where burning occurred many times in the same location. Such patterns suggest that fires were not simply passing through the landscape, but were being kept alive within spaces where people gathered. These areas are often interpreted as hearths, places where fire was intentionally maintained for warmth, light, and other activities. The presence of a hearth indicates that fire had become part of daily life, rather than an occasional encounter with a natural blaze. Around these hearths, researchers sometimes find fragments of animal bones that show signs of exposure to heat. The surfaces of these bones may appear darkened, cracked, or altered in ways that suggest contact with flames or embers. Similarly, plant remains recovered from archaeological sites can sometimes show evidence of charring. Seeds, grains, or pieces of plant tissue may survive in a carbonized state that preserves their shape, even though their original organic material has changed. These discoveries do not always prove exactly how food was prepared. A bone that has been burned might have fallen into a fire after the meal was finished, or a plant could have been accidentally charred while lying near the flames. Archaeological evidence must therefore be interpreted carefully. Researchers often rely on patterns rather than single objects. When burned bones, charred plant remains, and hearth structures appear together in the same location, the combination suggests repeated interactions between fire and food. Over time, these patterns form a picture of how early human communities used fire within their living spaces. The evidence indicates that fire was not simply present, but actively maintained in places where people gathered. Within those spaces, materials connected to food appear close to the areas where heat was strongest. This arrangement suggests that the transformation of food through heat may have become part of everyday activity, rather than an occasional accident. The archaeological record does not always reveal the exact moment when cooking began. Human history stretches across immense spans of time, and the traces left behind are often incomplete. Yet, the repeated appearance of hearths, burned bones, and charred plant remains provides clues that the relationship between fire and food gradually deepened as human societies developed. In these quiet marks left in soil and stone, researchers find the beginnings of a story that links the warmth of ancient fires to the way humans learn to interact with the food they serve. Gathered and hunted. If the material remains of ancient campsites suggest that food and fire often appeared side by side, what might this reveal about the daily routines of the people who once gathered around those early hearths? When archaeologists study ancient campsites, they rarely find a complete picture of daily life preserved in the ground. Time removes many details. Wood decays, plant tissues disappear, and the soft materials of human activity fade away. What remains are fragments, pieces of bone, traces of ash, scattered stones that once surrounded heat, and darkened layers of soil that suggest repeated burning in the same place. These fragments may seem small, yet when they appear together in consistent patterns, they begin to reveal how early humans organized their lives around fire. One of the most important signs of sustained fire use is the presence of a hearth. A hearth is not simply a place where something once burned, it is a location where fire appears to have been kept intentionally and repeatedly. In archaeological sites, hearths often show layers of ash, charcoal, and burned earth that build up over time. The ground beneath them sometimes becomes hardened or discolored from long exposure to heat. Stones placed near the fire may crack or change appearance after repeated heating and cooling. When these features appear together, they suggest that people return to the same place again and again to maintain a flame. The existence of hearths indicates that fire had become part of the regular structure of human living spaces. Rather than appearing briefly during a natural wildfire, fire was kept alive within areas where people gathered, rested, and shared daily activities. Within these spaces, the presence of burned materials connected to food becomes especially interesting. Animal bones recovered near ancient hearth sometimes show signs of exposure to heat. Their surfaces may appear blackened, gray, or altered in ways that suggest they were placed near flames or embers. These changes occur because bone, like other organic materials, responds to temperature. As heat increases, the structure of the bone gradually transforms, leaving visible traces that can survive long after the original meal has vanished. Plant remains can also appear in altered forms. Seeds, fragments of wood, and other plant materials sometimes survive in a charred state. The process of charring removes much of the original organic content, but preserves the shape of the object in a carbonized form. Because of this, charred plant remains can endure in the soil for thousands of years, offering clues about what kinds of plants once existed near human settlements. When such materials are found close to hearth structures, they suggest that plants and fire interacted within the same space. Interpreting these traces requires caution. A burned bone does not automatically prove that the animal was cooked before being eaten. It might have fallen into the fire after the meal was finished. Likewise, a charred plant seed might have been part of fuel rather than food. Archaeologists therefore examine the broader pattern surrounding each discovery. When multiple lines of evidence appear together, hearth structures, repeated ash layers, burned bones and charred plant remains, the combination suggests a regular relationship between fire and food within that site. Across many archaeological locations, this pattern begins to appear with increasing frequency as human history unfolds. Fires are maintained in central places within camps or settlements. Food remains appear close to these fires. The ground records repeated exposure to heat, indicating that flames were not temporary accidents, but ongoing features of daily life. These patterns do not provide a single moment when cooking began. Instead, they show a gradual shift in how humans interacted with fire and the materials they consumed. Fire becomes stable within the human environment, and food repeatedly appears in the same spaces where heat is strongest. Through these quiet traces preserved in soil and stone, researchers can begin to imagine scenes from the distant past. People gather around a fire that has been kept alive through the night. Branches are added as the flames fade. The warmth spreads outward into the darkness, and objects placed near the heat slowly change under its influence. In these spaces where fire and food share the same ground, The possibility of cooking moves from accident to habit. If ancient campsites reveal that fire and food repeatedly came together in the same place, what might this suggest about how daily meals were gradually shaped by the steady presence of heat? The traces left behind in ancient campsites rarely show the full moment when a meal was prepared. Instead, they reveal patterns that repeat over long periods of time. Ash appears layered within the soil. Stones that once surrounded a flame remain clustered together. Animal bones and fragments of plants lie scattered nearby, sometimes marked by heat. Each individual trace is small, but together they suggest a relationship between fire and food that occurred again and again within the same living spaces. When archaeologists examine these sites carefully, they often notice that hearths occupy central positions within the area where people once gathered. The fire was not placed randomly across the ground. It tended to appear in locations that allowed the warmth and light to reach those sitting nearby. Around these central fires, objects connected to daily life accumulated. Stone tools used for cutting or scraping appear in the same areas. Broken bones from animals that were eaten can be found within the surrounding soil. Fragments of plant material sometimes remain in a charred state. These patterns hint at a setting in which food preparation, eating, and social gathering occurred within the same circle of warmth. The structure of a hearth also reveals something about the way fire was maintained. In some ancient sites, stones were arranged to hold embers in one place and prevent the flame from spreading across the ground. Layers of ash indicate that fires were rekindled many times rather than appearing only once. This suggests that people return to the same fire again and again, adding fuel and keeping the heat alive over extended periods. A fire that continues burning for many hours or days creates an environment where materials placed near it gradually change under warmth. Food left close to the flame does not remain in the same condition as when it was first gathered. The interaction between fire and food in these spaces may not have required deliberate planning in the earlier stages. If pieces of meat or plant material were set near the fire simply to keep them within reach, heat would still influence their structure. Fibers might loosen, moisture could evaporate, tissues might soften in the warmth of the embers. Over repeated encounters with these changes, early humans could begin to notice that food, exposed to heat, behaved differently when bitten or chewed. This observation would not necessarily appear as a sudden invention. It could emerge gradually through experience. The body senses differences in texture and effort. A piece of food that softens near the fire requires less force from the teeth. Materials that once resisted chewing may begin to separate more easily. Over time, the repeated presence of these differences could shape habits around the fire. Instead of leaving food at random distances from the flame, people might begin placing certain materials closer to the warmth where the softening effect was strongest. Archaeological evidence cannot always capture these exact moments of learning. What it does reveal is that fires and food repeatedly shared the same spaces within ancient human settlements. Burned bones appear where heat was maintained. Charred plant remains preserved near the same hearths where ash accumulated over time. These clues suggest that the transformation of food through heat gradually became part of the ordinary environment of human life. When fire is kept alive within a living space, it does more than warm the air or illuminate the night. It creates a place where materials change under the influence of heat. Food placed within that circle of warmth no longer remains entirely raw. Its structure begins to shift before the act of eating begins. Across many generations, this quiet interaction between fire and food could slowly become a consistent element of human behavior. As these habits formed around ancient hearths, the presence of cooking may have begun to influence not only the condition of food, but also the rhythms of the people gathered nearby. If meals were shaped by the steady warmth of fire, how might that have changed the way time was spent during the day and evening in early human communities? When food begins to change under heat, the consequences do not end with the meal itself. The time required to gather, chew, and digest food has always been one of the quiet forces shaping the rhythm of life for animals. In many species, large portions of the day are devoted to eating and processing raw materials. The act of feeding can stretch across hours as jaws grind, stomachs work, and digestive systems slowly transform complex structures into usable energy. This pattern is not unusual in the animal world. It is simply the cost of obtaining nourishment from food that arrives in its natural, unaltered state. For early humans who lived in environments where food was gathered from plants or hunted from animals, the same demands would have been present. Tough plant fibers require time to chew. Animal tissues resist tearing and must be broken apart with repeated effort from the teeth. Once swallowed, digestion continues its slow chemical work. If meals consisted entirely of raw materials, a considerable portion of each day would likely have been dedicated to processing food inside the body. The presence of fire introduced a possibility that could gradually shift this balance. When heat softens the structures that surround nutrients, the physical effort required to chew and digest those foods may change. Plant tissues that have been warmed become easier to break apart. Fibers loosen, and the pressure required from the jaw may decrease. Animal tissues exposed to sustained heat may separate more readily than the same meat in its raw condition. These differences influence not only the texture of food, but also the time needed to process it. A meal that requires less force to chew may take less time to eat. Food that begins to break down under heat may move through the digestive system with slightly different efficiency than raw material that remains structurally intact. The digestive process still occurs, but its early stages have already begun before the food reaches the mouth. Over long periods of time, even modest changes in how food is processed can influence the rhythm of daily life. If chewing becomes easier and digestion begins with fewer structural barriers, the amount of time required to obtain usable energy from food may shift. This does not mean that early humans suddenly stopped spending time eating. Gathering and preparing food would still have required attention and effort. Yet, the balance between feeding and other activities could slowly adjust as the condition of food changed under heat. Fire itself may have contributed to this adjustment in another way. The presence of a hearth created a place where people gathered during the cooler hours of the evening. After a day of movement across the landscape in search of plants, animals, or other resources, returning to a fire provided warmth and visibility in the fading light. Within this space, food could be placed near the heat while people rested, spoke, or performed other small tasks. The fire became both a center of gathering and a place where food gradually softened. In this environment, the act of eating could become intertwined with the social and practical rhythms of life around the hearth. Instead of consuming food immediately upon gathering it, people might bring it back to the fire, where heat slowly altered its texture. As these habits formed, the transformation of food through warmth may have begun to shape not only the body's relationship with digestion, but also the structure of daily time. Meals could occur within shared spaces, illuminated by fire rather than scattered across the landscape. The act of eating might unfold in moments of rest rather than in constant motion. If cooking allowed food to soften near the hearth while people gathered in its warmth, how might that steady presence of fire begin to influence the social life forming within the circle of light it created? When a fire burns steadily within a living space, it changes more than the condition of food. It also changes how people move through the hours of the day. In the natural world, many animals must search for food continually. Grazing species walk slowly across the landscape for long stretches of time, feeding as they go. Primates gather fruits and leaves while moving from tree to tree. Predators may rest between hunts. Yet, when food is available, they must devote attention to tearing, chewing, and digesting raw materials that resist quick consumption. The rhythm of life in such conditions often follows the availability and difficulty of food itself. For early human communities, the presence of fire created a different kind of place within the landscape. A hearth did not move across the ground as animals did while grazing. It remained in one location, producing warmth and light that extended outward into the surrounding darkness. People could return to this place repeatedly, knowing that heat and visibility would greet them there. Over time, the hearth became a point of stability within a world otherwise defined by movement and uncertainty. As people gathered around this steady source of warmth, the tasks of daily life could begin to unfold within its circle of light. Tools could be repaired or shaped while sitting near the fire. Objects collected during the day could be sorted and examined. Pieces of food could rest close to the heat, where their texture slowly changed. These activity myths did not require constant movement through the landscape. Instead, they allowed people to remain together in a shared space for longer periods of time. In this setting, the relationship between food and time began to shift subtly. Raw food often demands immediate attention because chewing and digestion require sustained effort. When food is softened by heat near a fire, some of that effort may be reduced before eating begins. A root placed near embers may gradually lose its rigidity. Meat, exposed to warmth, may separate more easily under the pressure of teeth. These changes allow the act of eating to occur within moments of rest, rather than during continuous movement. The fire, therefore, creates a place where both people and food can remain still, while transformation takes place. Over long evenings beside the hearth, early human groups may have experienced a rhythm that cannot but differed from the pattern seen in many other animals. Instead of spending nearly every waking moment searching for and processing food, there could be periods of gathering, observation, and quiet activity around the fire. The warmth held the group together within a small circle of light, while the darkness extended beyond it. Within that circle, food softened slowly, and conversation or shared tasks could unfold at a calmer pace. This change in rhythm does not mean that life suddenly became easy or free from effort. Food still had to be gathered from the landscape, and fire itself required attention and fuel. Yet the presence of a stable hearth allowed certain moments of the day to gather around a single place. The act of eating no longer existed only as an isolated encounter between a body and raw material. It became part of a shared environment where heat, light, and human presence combined to shape daily routines. As these patterns repeated over many generations, the fire may have done more than warm the body or soften food. It may also have influenced how people related to one another within that illuminated space. When individuals sit together near a steady flame, the light reveals faces and gestures that would otherwise disappear in darkness. Voices carry through the quiet night air. Objects can be passed from hand to hand within the glow of the embers. In such conditions, the hearth becomes not only a place where food changes, but also a place where human interaction unfolds in new ways. If the steady warmth of fire began to gather people together in shared spaces, how might this circle of light have shaped the early forms of social life that developed around it? When people remain together around a steady fire, the experience of food gradually becomes something shared rather than purely individual. In many animals, feeding occurs wherever food is found. A grazing animal lowers its head and eats where it stands. A predator consumes prey where the hunt ends. Even among social animals, meals are often tied directly to the moment and location where food appears in the environment. The act of eating is immediate, shaped by opportunity and by the physical effort required to process raw materials. The presence of a hearth introduces a different possibility. Instead of eating food only at the place where it was gathered or hunted, people may bring food back to the fire. The warmth and light create a place where members of the group can sit together while the food rests near the heat. As plant materials soften and animal tissues loosen, the meal begins to change before anyone takes the first bite. The transformation happens within a shared space, rather than in isolation. This arrangement allows the act of eating to unfold in a slower and more collective rhythm. People gather within the circle of light, and the warmth of the fire extends the hours during which they can remain together. In such an environment, the preparation of food may gradually become a visible process rather than something hidden within the body. When raw materials are placed near heat, the change in texture can be seen and felt. Steam may rise from moist plant tissues. Meat placed close to embers may darken and release its scent into the air. These sensory signals make the transformation of food part of the shared experience around the sheaves. Anton 12. Over time, such experiences may shape how early human groups approach the act of eating. Instead of each individual consuming food immediately after finding it, meals could become moments when the group returned to the same place and gathered together. The fire provided a stable center where warmth, light, and changing food could all be observed at once. In this way, cooking may have influenced not only the physical state of food, but also the social context in which meals occurred. The hearth becomes a point where people wait, watch, and share the anticipation of food that is slowly changing under heat. This waiting introduces a subtle shift in the relationship between time and eating. Raw food often demands immediate processing. Tough fibers and tissues must be chewed and digested without delay. Cooking allows part of that work to happen while people are resting or interacting with one another. Food can remain near the heat, while conversation, tool repair, or simple observation takes place within the glow of the fire. When the meal is finally eaten, it has already begun its transformation. In this sense, cooking may have quietly altered the structure of daily social life. The fire gathers people together, and the food placed near it encourages shared attention. Instead of each person eating wherever they happen to find food, the group returns to a common place where warmth, light, and nourishment converge. These repeated moments around the hearth could gradually strengthen the bonds between individuals who depend on one another for survival. The fire does not simply change the chemistry of food, it changes the setting in which food becomes part of human life. When early human communities began to share meals within the steady circle of light created by fire, the experience of eating may have taken on new meanings that extended beyond the physical act of nourishment. If cooking encouraged people to gather, wait, and share meals together, how might this shared space around the fire have influenced the deeper social structures that slowly formed within human groups? Within the circle of light created by a steady fire, the experience of gathering together begins to take on a particular rhythm. The darkness beyond the fire remains vast and uncertain, yet inside the warm glow, the ground, the faces of companions, and the objects placed nearby become visible. This small island of light in the night may have been one of the earlier spaces where human groups could remain together for extended periods without the constant movement required during daylight hours. The fire slows the pace of life, encouraging people to sit rather than travel, to observe rather than search. In such an environment, the preparation and sharing of food becomes closely tied to the presence of others. When food is warmed near a fire, rather than eaten immediately where it is found, a quiet interval appears between gathering and eating. During this interval, people remain near the flame, while the structure of food gradually changes under heat. Plant materials soften as warmth loosens their fibers. Animal tissues separate more easily after resting near embers. These transformations unfold slowly enough that the group has time to remain together while waiting for the meal to become ready. The waiting itself becomes part of the experience. The act of eating no longer begins the moment food is discovered. Instead, it may begin after the group has returned to the hearth, arranged the materials near the heat, and allowed the warmth to alter their texture. This shift may seem small, yet it introduces a different pattern of social behavior. Waiting for food encourages attention to the shared space around the fire. Individuals who gather there can watch the same flame, observe the same changes in the food, and remain present with one another during the process. The fire, therefore, creates a place where time is experienced collectively rather than individually. In many animals, feeding is a solitary act that occurs wherever food appears. Even when animals live in groups, they often eat separately once food has been located. The presence of a hearth offers another possibility. Food can be carried to the same place where the group gathers. The heat slowly transforms the materials, while people remain nearby. The meal becomes connected to a location and to the individuals present within that space. Over repeated evenings around the fire, these patterns may strengthen the association between warmth, food, and companionship. The glow of the embers provides enough light for faces and gestures to be seen. Voices travel more clearly within the quiet darkness. Objects can be passed from one person to another as people sit close together near the flame. Within this setting, the preparation of food becomes visible to everyone in the group, rather than hidden inside the body of the eater. Each person can observe the same changes taking place as heat alters the food, resting near the fire. Such shared observation may have influenced the development of early social habits. When people gather regularly around a common fire, they also share the moments leading up to a meal. The time between placing food near the heat and finally eating it becomes a space where conversation, cooperation, and simple presence unfold together. Cooking therefore affects more than the chemical structure of food. It changes the setting in which food becomes part of human life. The hearth becomes a meeting point where nourishment, warmth, and social connection come together within the same circle of light. As these patterns repeat across generations, the fire may slowly shape not only the preparation of food, but also the ways in which human groups learn to remain together. If cooking created a shared moment of waiting and gathering around the hearth, what influence might that shared time have had on the communication and cooperation that began to grow within the early human communities? When people remain together in the glow of a fire, the environment around them becomes different from the open landscape of the day. During daylight hours, movement across the land is often necessary. Food must be gathered, animals tracked, and useful materials collected from many different places. Individuals may spread out across the terrain as they search for what they need. The rhythm of the day is shaped by distance and by the uncertainty of what the environment might offer. Evening around the fire introduces another kind of setting. The group gathers within a smaller and more stable space. The light of the flames makes it possible to see faces, tools, and the ground beneath one's feet, even after darkness has settled across the land. In this circle of light, people remain near one another rather than moving apart. The fire encourages stillness, and the warmth allows the group to stay together longer than they might in the cold or darkness alone. When food is placed near the heat to soften or change in texture, the preparation of a meal unfolds within this shared environment. The process is visible to everyone present. A piece of plant material resting near the embers slowly releases moisture as it warms. Animal tissue placed close to the heat changes color and becomes easier to separate. These transformations do not happen instantly. They require time, and during that time, the group remains gathered around the same source of warmth and light. This shared waiting creates an opportunity for attention to move away from the immediate demands of survival. Instead of searching constantly for food or shelter, people can remain in one place while the fire performs part of the work needed to prepare the meal. In this environment, communication may begin to occupy more space in the rhythm of the evening. Voices carry through the quiet night air, and gestures can be seen clearly within the firelight. Individuals can observe one another's expressions and movements in ways that are difficult in darkness. The presence of a hearth therefore supports not only the transformation of food, but also the possibility of extended interaction among members of the group. Objects and materials collected during the day may also become part of this shared attention. Tools can be examined, repaired, or passed from hand to hand near the fire. Bones from previous meals may be broken open to reach marrow. Branches added to the flames crackle as they ignite, drawing the gaze of those sitting nearby. The fire becomes a focal point around which many small activities unfold at once. Cooking in this setting is not an isolated task performed away from others. It is an activity that unfolds within the same space where conversation, observation, and cooperation occur. The warmth that softens food also creates an atmosphere where individuals remain aware of one another's presence. Over many evenings and many generations, these repeated gatherings around the fire may have strengthened patterns of shared attention and communication. The meal prepared near the hearth becomes more than a source of nourishment. It becomes part of a sequence of events in which people gather, wait, speak, and eat together, within the same illuminated space. In this way, cooking may have quietly encouraged a form of social life, centered on shared time and shared observation. The transformation of food by heat unfolds slowly enough that people remain together while it happens. The fire holds the group within its glow, and the meal becomes a moment that belongs to everyone present. As these shared moments accumulate across the long history of human life, they raise another question about the deeper consequences of cooking. If the hearth created a place where communication and cooperation could flourish while food changed under heat, how might this environment have influenced the development of the human brain that depends so heavily on energy? When food begins to change under the steady warmth of fire, the transformation does not occur only in the visible texture of what is being prepared. It also affects the way energy becomes available to the human body. All animals depend on the energy stored inside the plants and animals they consume. Yet the path from food to usable energy is not always simple. Many natural foods contain nutrients locked inside complex structures that resist easy breakdown. Fibers surround plant cells, connective tissues hold together muscle, and protective layers surround the chemical compounds that the body ultimately needs. Digestion is the process through which these barriers are gradually opened so that nutrients can be absorbed. In raw food, much of this work must be performed by the body itself. Teeth tear and grind materials into smaller pieces. Stomach acids and digestive enzymes continue the process, slowly breaking apart structures that protect the nutrients within. This process requires time and energy. In many animals, large digestive systems and long feeding periods help manage the effort required to extract nourishment from raw plants or tough animal tissues. The presence of heat changes this process before food even reaches the mouth. When plant materials are exposed to sustained warmth, the structures that surround their cells begin to weaken, fibers loosen, and some chemical bonds shift in ways that make the contents of the cells easier to access. Animal tissues exposed to heat also change as proteins unfold and connective structures soften. These transformations do not create new nutrients, but they can make existing nutrients more accessible to the body during digestion. As a result, some of the work that would normally occur inside the digestive system begins outside the body near the fire. Food placed near heat starts to break down in small ways before it is eaten. The chewing required to process the material may become easier, and the digestive system may encounter fewer structural barriers once the food is swallowed. Over time, even modest improvements in how efficiently energy can be extracted from food may influence the balance between energy intake and the body's needs. The human brain, for example, requires a substantial amount of energy relative to its size. Maintaining the activity of billions of nerve cells demands a steady supply of fuel. In modern humans, the brain consumes a significant share of the body's total energy, despite representing only a small portion of body mass. For early humans living in environments where food was not always guaranteed, obtaining enough usable energy would have been a constant challenge. If cooking made certain nutrients easier to access, the total amount of usable energy derived from each meal might increase slightly. These differences would not appear as sudden transformations in a single generation. Instead, they would accumulate gradually across long periods of time. Small improvements in the efficiency of digestion could allow the body to redirect energy toward other biological processes. The development and maintenance of complex brain activity might have been one area where such energy became especially valuable. Researchers continue to examine how changes in diet, digestion, and energy availability may have interacted with the evolution of the human brain. The exact sequence of events remains an area of ongoing study, and many details are still debated. Yet, the basic principle is widely recognized. The energy obtained from food supports the biological systems that define human life. When fire began to transform food before it entered the body, it introduced a new step in the long chain, connecting the environment to the energy that sustains the human mind. If cooking helped unlock energy from food in ways that raw materials could not easily provide, What role might this quiet transformation have played in supporting the unusually demanding brain that distinguishes our species today? Among all organs of the human body, the brain occupies a unique position in terms of energy demand. Though it represents only a small fraction of total body weight, it consumes a large share of the energy that the body produces each day. This energy supports the continuous activity of billions of neurons, cells that communicate through electrical and chemical signals to guide perception, memory, movement, and thought. Unlike many other tissues, the brain cannot easily store large reserves of fuel. It depends on a steady flow of energy from the nutrients that enter the bloodstream after food has been digested. Because of this requirement, the relationship between diet and brain function is deeply connected to the way food is processed before and after it enters the body. In many animals, the digestive system is built to handle large quantities of raw plant material or tough animal tissues. Long intestines, specialized stomach chambers, or repeated chewing cycles help release nutrients from materials that resist quick breakdown. These adaptations allow animals to obtain sufficient energy from raw food, but they often require long feeding periods and large digestive organs to perform the necessary work. Humans, by contrast, show a somewhat different balance between digestive effort and brain activity. The human digestive system is capable of processing a wide range of foods, yet it is not as specialized for breaking down large quantities of raw plant fibers as the digestive systems of some other species. At the same time, the human brain requires a steady supply of energy to sustain its complex activity. This combination has led many researchers to consider how changes in diet and food preparation might have influenced the energy balance within the human body. Cooking offers one possible explanation for how this balance could have developed. When heat alters the structure of food before it is eaten, some of the barriers that normally protect nutrients begin to weaken, plant cell walls soften, and proteins in animal tissues change shape under sustained warmth. These structural shifts can make nutrients more accessible during digestion, allowing the body to absorb energy with less effort than might be required for raw materials alone. In this sense, cooking moves part of the digestive process outside the body. The fire begins to perform some of the work that would otherwise occur inside the stomach and intestines. Over long periods of time, this shift could influence how energy is distributed within the body. If more energy becomes available from each meal, the body may have greater flexibility in how that energy is used. Some of it continues to support basic survival processes, such as movement, repair, and temperature regulation. Another portion may contribute to the development and maintenance of the brain's demanding activity. The relationship between cooking and brain evolution remains a subject of scientific discussion, and researchers approach it with careful attention to the evidence available from biology, archaeology, and comparative anatomy. While the exact sequence of events is not fully resolved, many scientists recognize that the human brain's energy requirements would have placed strong pressure on early human diets. Obtaining enough usable energy from available food sources would have been essential for supporting the metabolic demands of such a large and active organ. In environments where food resources varied across seasons and landscapes, any method that increased the efficiency of energy extraction could have provided an advantage. Cooking may have been one such method. By altering the structure of food through heat, early humans may have gained access to nutrients that would otherwise remain partially locked within raw materials. Across many generations, this quiet interaction between fire, food, and digestion could have influenced the energetic foundation upon which human brain activity depends. If the transformation of food by heat helped support the energetic needs of the human brain, what other changes in the human body might have gradually followed as cooking became a regular part of daily life? The human body carries within it traces of long changes that unfolded across deep time. Bones, muscles, teeth, and organs all reflect ways in which our species has adapted to the foods available in its environment. When researchers compare the human digestive system with that of other animals, They notice a particular balance between the size of the brain and the structure of the organs responsible for digestion. This balance has often drawn attention because maintaining a large brain requires a steady supply of energy. Yet, the digestive system itself occupies less space and mass than might be expected for an animal that depends heavily on plant and animal foods gathered from the natural world. In many species that rely strongly on raw plant materials, the digestive system is extensive. Long intestines and specialized stomach chambers help break down tough fibers that protect nutrients inside plant cells. These structures allow animals to extract energy from materials that would otherwise pass through the body without being fully digested. Such systems require considerable internal space and energy to maintain. Yet, they are effective at processing raw vegetation that contains complex structural barriers. Humans show a somewhat different pattern. While the human digestive system is fully capable of processing both plant and animal foods, it is not built with the extreme length or specialized chambers found in certain herbivorous animals. At the same time, the human brain demands a large share of the body's energy supply. This contrast has led scientists to consider how the human body might maintain such an energy-intensive organ while operating with a digestive system that is comparatively moderate in size. One possibility involves the way food is prepared before digestion begins. When heat alters the structure of plant fibers and animal tissues, some of the work normally required from the digestive organs may be reduced. Cooking softens plant cell walls and changes the structure of proteins within meat. These changes do not remove the need for digestion, but they can make nutrients easier to reach once food enters the stomach and intestines. In effect, part of the breakdown process begins outside the body near the fire. If cooking became a regular part of daily life, this external preparation of food could gradually influence the relationship between the digestive system and the rest of the body. Nutrients that are easier to access may provide energy more efficiently, allowing the body to support functions that require substantial fuel. Among these functions, the activity of the brain stands out because of the constant energy it demands. Over long spans of evolutionary time, small differences in energy efficiency can influence which physical traits are maintained or reduced. A digestive system that does not need to process large quantities of extremely tough raw materials may not require the same structural complexity found in animals that rely entirely on raw vegetation. At the same time, energy made available through easier digestion could support organs that require continuous fuel. Researchers often approach these ideas with caution, recognizing that many factors influence how bodies evolve. Climate, available food sources, patterns of movement, and social behavior all interact across generations. Cooking alone does not explain every aspect of human anatomy. Yet, the possibility that fire and food preparation altered the energetic balance of the human body remains an important area of study. When heat begins to perform part of the work of digestion outside the body, the relationship between food and anatomy may gradually shift. The human body that exists today reflects many layers of such changes, each shaped by the environments and habits of the past. Among these influences, the quiet presence of fire may have played a role in shaping how energy flows from the landscape into the organs that define human life. If cooking helped change the balance between digestion and energy use within the human body, how might this shift have influenced other visible features of the human face and teeth that interact directly with food? The interaction between food and the human body can also be observed in the structures that first encounter a meal, the teeth and the shape of the face. Every bite of food begins its journey through these structures. Teeth tear, crush, and grind materials before swallowing begins. The muscles of the jaw guide these movements, and the bones of the face provide the framework that supports them. Across different species, these features often reflect the types of food regularly consumed. Animals that feed on tough plant fibers typically possess large murs with broad grinding surfaces. Their jaws are supported by strong muscles capable of producing the force required to break down resistant materials. In contrast, Species that eat softer foods or foods that are already partially broken down may rely less on heavy chewing and more on other stages of digestion. When scientists compare the teeth and facial structure of modern humans with those of earlier human relatives and other primates, certain differences become noticeable. The human jaw is relatively smaller and less projecting than the jaws of many other primates. Human teeth, particularly the molars and canines, are also somewhat reduced in size compared with the larger teeth seen in species that rely heavily on raw and fibrous foods. These anatomical differences have encouraged researchers to consider how changes in diet and food preparation might have influenced the gradual reshaping of the human face over time. One possible factor is the repeated consumption of food that's already been softened before chewing begins. When plant tissues are warmed, the fibers surrounding their cells loosen and become easier to break apart. Meat exposed to heat may separate more readily than the same tissue in its raw form. These changes reduce the force required from the teeth and jaw muscles to prepare food for swallowing. Over many generations, if a population regularly consumes foods that demand less mechanical effort to chew, the physical structures involved in chewing may gradually adjust to the reduced demand. The human face, with its smaller jaw and more delicate chewing apparatus, compared with some earlier homins, has sometimes been examined through this perspective. Cooking does not act alone in shaping these anatomical patterns. Tools for cutting and processing food also play an important role. A sharp stone edge can divide animal tissue into smaller pieces before it reaches the mouth. Grinding tools can break down plant materials into fragments that require less chewing. These technological practices work alongside cooking to change how food interacts with the teeth and jaw. Together, these changes may reduce the amount of force needed to process each bite. As with other aspects of human evolution, the transformation of facial structure occurred gradually across many generations. Fossil evidence shows variation among different hominin species, reflecting a complex history of dietary strategies and environmental conditions. Some species possess larger teeth and stronger jaws adapted to heavy chewing. Others show trends towards smaller dental structures and more compact facial bones. Researchers continue to study these patterns carefully, comparing fossils, modern anatomy, and experimental studies of food processing. While the exact role of cooking within these changes remains an area of ongoing research, the broader connection between diet and anatomy is widely recognized. The foods a species regularly consumes influence the mechanical demands placed on its teeth and jaws. When heat begins to alter food before it reaches the mouth, the body's first stage of digestion may gradually experience less strain. Over long periods of time, these subtle shifts may contribute to the facial features that characterize modern humans. In this way, the quiet act of placing food near fire may have reached further into the body than the digestive system alone. It may have touched the bones and teeth that frame the human face. If cooking helped reduce the physical effort required to process food, how might this long relationship between fire and nourishment continue to shape the daily habits that still surround human meals today? Across much of human history, the preparation of food did not occur in kitchens separated from daily life. It took place in open spaces, where fire burned directly on the ground. The hearth was not simply a tool for cooking, but a center of activity around which many parts of human life gathered. Within that space, the transformation of food through heat became intertwined with the rhythms of work, rest, and social interaction. When early humans carried gathered plants or hunted animals back to the fire, the act of preparing food unfolded slowly in the presence of others. The materials collected during the day were placed near the warmth of embers or above the flame. As heat altered their texture, the change could be seen and smelled by everyone nearby. This visibility meant that the preparation of food was rarely hidden or isolated. It happened in the same place where people repaired tools, spoke with one another, and watched the fire burn through the evening hours. In such an environment, cooking became part of a shared routine rather than a private task. The fire itself demanded attention. Branches had to be added to keep the flame alive, and embers needed to be managed. so that heat remained steady without spreading beyond the hearth. These small acts of maintenance kept the group aware of the fire's presence. While tending the flame, people also remained aware of the food resting near it. The gradual softening of roots or the changing surface of meat provided visual signs that the meal was approaching readiness. This shared awareness could encourage cooperation within the group. One person might adjust the placement of food closer to the embers, while another added fuel to maintain the heat. Someone else might divide the prepared food into smaller portions once it was ready to eat. Through these repeated actions, cooking became linked to simple forms of coordination among individuals who depended on one another for survival. The hearth also created a predictable point within the landscape. While the day might involve movement across forests, plains, or riverbanks in search of food, the fire marked a place to which people could return, knowing that warmth and a shared meal awaited at that location may have shaped how groups organized their activities. Individuals could travel outward during daylight hours with the expectation that they would gather again around the same source of heat as evening approached. The preparation of food at the hearth therefore connected the wider environment to a central place within the group's daily life. Plants and animals collected from distant areas were brought back and transformed by the fire. In this way, the hearth acted as a bridge between the landscape and the bodies that depended on its resources. Each meal represented a small movement of energy from the surrounding world into the shared space of the group. Over generations, these repeated gatherings around fire may have strengthened the role of cooking as a defining human habit. The transformation of food by heat did not occur in isolation from social life. It unfolded within the same environment where people rested, spoke, and cooperated. The warmth of the fire made the preparation of food visible and shared, allowing it to become a routine that belonged to the group rather than to a single individual. As this pattern continued through time, cooking gradually became embedded within the structure of human life. It was not only a way to alter food, but also a practice that connected people to one another, within the circle of light and warmth provided by fire. If cooking became a shared activity that gathered people around a predictable place in this landscape, how might this habit have influenced the ways human groups organized their movements and cooperation across the environments where they lived? As the habit of preparing food near fire became more regular, it likely influenced how people coordinated their efforts within a group. In many animal species, the moment food appears is often followed by competition. Individuals may rush to consume as much as possible before others take it. The opportunity to eat is brief, and the act of feeding often occurs quickly and separately. Raw food demands immediate processing, and there is little reason to delay the act of eating once food has been secured.
The presence of cooking introduces a different sequence of events. When food is placed near heat to soften or change in texture, a pause appears between the moment food is gathered and the moment it is eaten. This pause creates a shared period of waiting around the fire. The food rests near the warmth of embers, while its structure gradually changes. During this time, the group remains nearby, observing the fire and the meal that is slowly becoming ready. This waiting may encourage a different form of cooperation if food is brought back to a common hearth, rather than eaten immediately where it is found. Individuals must rely on one another to maintain the conditions that allow the meal to be prepared. The fire must be kept alive. Fuel must be added. Food must be placed at the correct distance from the heat so that it softens without burning. These tasks are small, but they require attention from those gathered around the flame. In this way, cooking can become a shared responsibility rather than a solitary act. The presence of fire also changes how food is divided within the group. When a meal is prepared at a central hearth, everyone present can observe the process from beginning to end. The transformation of food happens within sight of the group, rather than in isolation. Once the food is ready, it can be distributed among those who have gathered around the fire. This visibility may help support patterns of sharing that strengthen relationships within the group. The act of cooking, therefore, influences more than the physical condition of food. It alters the sequence through which food moves from the environment into the bodies of those who depend on it. The process becomes extended across time and space. Food is gathered from the landscape, carried back to a central place, transformed by heat, and then shared among those present. Each stage of this process creates opportunities for cooperation and coordination over long periods of time. These repeated patterns may contribute to the stability of human groups living in challenging environments. When individuals know that food will be brought back to a shared fire rather than consumed, immediately they may be more willing to travel farther or spend more time searching for resources that benefit the group as a whole. The hearth becomes a location where the results of these efforts come together. Cooking also slows the pace of the meal itself. Instead of consuming food rapidly to secure a portion before others do, people may eat within a more measured rhythm once the food has been prepared and divided. The fire continues to burn as the group shares the meal, extending the time spent together in the glow of the flames. In this environment, nourishment, cooperation, and conversation unfold side by side. Through these subtle changes, cooking may have helped shape patterns of trust and shared effort that became important within human communities. The transformation of food by heat required patience and attention, and the results of that transformation could be enjoyed collectively by those gathered near the hearth. As these habits repeated across generations, the act of cooking may have contributed to the deeper social structures that support human cooperation today. If cooking encouraged the sharing of food and the coordination of effort within early human groups, what influence might this practice have had on the cultural traditions that later developed around human meals? When the preparation of food takes place around a shared fire, the act of eating gradually becomes part of a sequence of repeated behaviors. The same place is used again and again. The same flame is tended with new branches. Food gathered from the surrounding landscape returns to the hearth where it is warmed, softened, and divided among those present. Over long periods of time, these repeated actions begin to form patterns that shape how people expect meals to unfold. In the earlier stages, these patterns may have been simple. Food was brought back to the fire because warmth and light made the place comfortable for gathering. Heat softened certain materials and made them easier to chew. Yet as these actions were repeated night after night, they gradually created a rhythm that connected daily survival with shared experience. The fire became the location where the effort of the day concluded and nourishment was finally enjoyed. Within this rhythm, the meal itself could begin to carry meaning beyond its role as fuel for the body. When people eat together in the same place at the end of the day, the act of sharing food also becomes a moment when the group recognizes its own continuity. Those who gathered plants, those who hunted animals, and those who maintained the fire all contributed to the same outcome. The prepared food resting near the embers represented the combined effort of many individuals. Eating together made that effort visible. This visibility may have strengthened the expectation that resources gathered by individuals would eventually return to the shared hearth. The landscape provided food, but the hearth transformed that food into a collective meal. Over time, this repeated return to a central fire could encourage habits of cooperation and mutual reliance. Individuals who depended on the group for protection and support would also participate in the shared process of preparing and distributing food. As generations passed, these practical habits may have slowly evolved into traditions surrounding the preparation and sharing of meals. While early human groups did not leave written records of their customs, the repeated use of hearths in archaeological sites suggests that the gathering of people around fire remained a consistent part of human life. The meal prepared near the flame became one of the most predictable events within the daily cycle of activity. From this simple beginning, later human societies developed many different forms of food preparation and shared dining. Cooking techniques grew more complex as tools and containers allowed people to control heat in new ways. Yet, the basic pattern remained recognizable. Food was gathered from the environment, transformed through heat, and shared within a social setting. The hearth of early human communities can be seen as one of the earliest spaces where this pattern appeared. Even in modern times, echoes of that ancient structure remain visible. Kitchens and dining areas often occupy central places within homes. Families or groups still gather to prepare meals together and to sit near one another while eating. The tools have changed and the variety of foods has expanded, but the connection between cooking and social gathering continues to reflect habits that may reach back to those first shared fires. In this way, cooking has shaped not only the biological and energetic relationship between humans and food, but also the cultural expectations surrounding how meals are prepared and experienced. The simple act of placing food near heat created a routine that linked nourishment with cooperation, waiting, and shared presence. Across thousands of generations, that routine grew into one of the most familiar structures of human life. If cooking became such a central habit within human societies, why did other animals that also encounter fire in the natural world never develop a similar relationship with heat and food? Fire exists in many parts of the natural world, yet the way humans interact with it remains unusual. Lightning can ignite dry grasslands. Volcanic activity can release intense heat from beneath the earth. In forests and savannas, wildfires periodically sweep across the landscape, leaving behind charred ground and altered vegetation. Many animals encounter these events during their lives. Some species flee from the advancing flames. Others return to recently burned areas where new plant growth appears after the fire passes. Despite these encounters, animals do not gather burning branches, maintain steady flames, or deliberately place food near heat so that it changes before eating. The difference lies not in the existence of fire itself, but in how it is understood and controlled. Fire is a powerful process, rather than a stable object. It consumes fuel, spreads unpredictably, and disappears when its energy is exhausted. For most animals, such a process offers little opportunity for repeated interaction. The safest response is simply to avoid the flames and return once the fire has moved on. Without the ability to maintain fire in one place, there is no reliable way to use its heat to transform food. Humans, however, gradually developed the ability to manage fire in ways that altered this relationship. Rather than encountering fire only as a destructive force in the landscape, early humans learned to preserve embers and carry them from one location to another. A small glowing fragment of charcoal could be sheltered from wind and fed with dry plant material until flames returned. In this way, the life of a fire could be extended far beyond the moment when it first appeared. Maintaining a flame required attention and knowledge. The fire had to be protected from rain, provided with fuel, and kept within a space where it would not spread uncontrollably. These practices transformed fire from a brief natural event into a stable presence within human living spaces. Once fire could be maintained in this way, its heat became available for repeated use. The warmth of embers could be approached safely when managed within a hearth. Materials placed near that warmth could gradually change under controlled conditions rather than under the unpredictable intensity of a wildfire. This ability to keep fire alive created the possibility of cooking as a consistent activity rather than a rare accident. Animals that encounter fire in nature do not typically maintain these controlled conditions. Without the habit of preserving embers or feeding flames with new fuel, the opportunity to place food near steady heat rarely appears. A wildfire passes quickly, and the landscape it leaves behind cools long before any animal could repeatedly experiment with how heat changes the materials they eat. Humans, by contrast, created environments where fire remained present for long periods of time. The hearth served as a boundary that held flames within a manageable space. Within that boundary, the heat could be approached closely enough to influence food without destroying it. This relationship between control and observation allowed early humans to notice how warmth altered the texture and structure of materials placed near the fire. Through repeated experience, the connection between heat and food became familiar rather than accidental. The ability to maintain fire did not appear instantly. It likely developed gradually as human groups learned which materials burn well, how to protect embers from wind, and how to keep flames from spreading beyond the hearth. Each small improvement increased the stability of fire within human environments. As that stability grew, the opportunity to use heat for preparing food also became more reliable. If the key difference between humans and other animals lies in the ability to maintain and control fire, what qualities of human behavior allowed our species to develop this unusual relationship with a force that most animals simply avoid? The ability to maintain fire is closely connected to a set of behaviors that distinguish humans from other animals. Fire cannot be used in a single moment and then forgotten. It must be watched, fed, and protected if it is to continue burning. A flame left unattended will eventually fade as its fuel is exhausted. Wind or rain may extinguish it, and uncontrolled flames may spread beyond the place where they are useful. For fire to remain part of daily life, those who rely on it must repeatedly return to the task of caring for it. This pattern of attention requires patience and a sense of continuity across time. A branch placed on the embers now does not produce its full effect immediately. The wood slowly catches, the flame strengthens, and warmth spreads outward. The benefit appears gradually. In order to maintain a fire through the night or across several days, people must anticipate that future need and act before the flame disappears. Such anticipation reflects a form of behavior that is relatively uncommon in most other animals. Many species respond quickly to immediate opportunities in their environment. When food appears, they eat. When danger approaches, they flee. Actions are often closely tied to present conditions. Maintaining fire, however, requires attention to something that is still unfolding. The flame must be preserved even during moments when its usefulness is not yet visible. The warmth it provides later depends on the care it receives now. Alongside patience, the use of fire also requires repeated observation. People must notice how different materials behave when placed near heat. Dry branches ignite easily, while damp wood may resist burning. Certain plants catch fire quickly, producing bright flames, while others smolder slowly and maintain embers for longer periods. These observations accumulate over time as individuals watch the fire respond to different kinds of fuel. Through this gradual learning process, people become more capable of controlling the flame and adjusting it to their needs. Another important element is the transmission of knowledge between members of the group. If one person learns how to protect embers from wind or how to restart a fading fire, that knowledge can be shared with others nearby. Over many generations, such information may pass from older individuals to younger ones who observe the same practices around the hearth. In this way, fire becomes part of a tradition rather than a discovery that must be repeated from the beginning each time. The hearth itself reflects this accumulated knowledge. Stones arranged around the fire help contain the flames and prevent them from spreading across the ground. Fuel is placed carefully so that the heat remains steady rather than erupting into uncontrolled burning. Food can then be positioned near the warmth, where it changes gradually, instead of being consumed by the flames. These practices transform fire from a dangerous force in the environment into a tool that can be used repeatedly within the living space of the group. Once fire is maintained in this stable way, its heat becomes a predictable part of daily life. People know where the warmth will be found and when it will be available. Food gathered from the landscape can be brought back to the same place and prepared near the same source of heat. The repeated presence of fire allows the transformation of food to become a habit rather than a rare event. This combination of patience, observation, and shared knowledge helps explain why humans developed such an unusual relationship with fire. The flame becomes something that is not merely encountered, but carefully sustained across time. As this relationship deepens, the use of fire extends into many aspects of life, including the preparation of food that defines cooking. If the human ability to maintain fire depends on patience, observation, and shared learning, how might these qualities have supported the long tradition of cooking that continues to reshape human life today? As the relationship between humans and fire grew stronger, the presence of a controlled flame gradually became part of the background of daily life. What may have begun as occasional encounters with natural fires slowly developed into a habit of keeping embers alive within the places where people lived and gathered. Over time, the fire was no longer only a reaction to the environment, but a stable element within it. The hearth created a point in the landscape where heat, light, and human activity met repeatedly. This stability allowed new patterns of behavior to form around the fire. Once people learned that flames could be maintained and guided, the possibilities for using heat expanded. Fire warmed the air during cold nights and illuminated the darkness that followed sunset. It could also alter materials placed within its reach. Plant fibers softened, animal tissues loosened, objects made of wood or other natural materials responded to the steady warmth of embers. Each of these changes became part of the growing familiarity between humans and the flame they had learned to sustain. Among these uses, the transformation of food gradually became one of the most consistent. Cooking did not require a sudden invention or a dramatic moment of discovery. Instead, it could emerge through repeated observation. When food was placed near heat and later eaten, the differences in texture and effort became noticeable. Roots that were difficult to chew when raw became softer after resting near the embers. Meat exposed to warmth separated more easily under the teeth. These experiences, repeated over many evenings beside the fire, could slowly shape expectations about how food should be prepared. The fire itself provided the conditions that made such observations possible. Unlike a wildfire that moves quickly across the land, a hearth allowed heat to remain in one place. People could adjust the distance between food and flame, learning through experience how warmth altered different materials. Some foods responded best to gentle heat near glowing embers, while others required stronger flames for shorter periods. These adjustments were likely learned gradually through practice, rather than formal instruction. Over generations, this growing familiarity with fire and food may have deepened the habit of cooking until it became an ordinary part of human life. Children who grew up near the hearth would observe the same actions performed by older members of the group. They would see food carried back to the fire, placed near the warmth, and later shared among those gathered nearby. Through observation and participation, the knowledge of cooking would pass quietly from one generation to the next. In this way, cooking became more than a practical technique. It became a tradition rooted in the relationship between people, fire, and the materials they gathered from the environment. The transformation of food through heat was no longer an accidental outcome, but a familiar step within the daily cycle of human activity. The fire burned, food rested near its warmth, and the group gathered within the circle of light that the flames created. Other animals that encounter fire in the natural world do not typically develop this kind of sustained relationship with it. Without the habits of maintaining flames, observing their effects, and passing knowledge across generations, the opportunity to transform food through controlled heat remains rare. Humans, however, built a long tradition around these behaviors. The hearth became a place where fire was not feared or avoided, but carefully managed and integrated into daily life. Through this relationship, cooking gradually became one of the most distinctive practices associated with being human. If the long tradition of cooking grew from the careful maintenance of fire and the sharing of knowledge across generations, how might this ancient practice continue to shape the ways humans relate to food, culture, and one another today? Across the long span of human history, the act of cooking gradually spread into nearly every environment where people lived, from forests and grasslands to coastal regions and mountain valleys. The hearth traveled with human groups as they moved through the landscape. Wherever people settled, even temporarily, traces of fire often appeared nearby. Charred wood, layers of ash, and stones darkened by repeated heating reveal that the controlled flame remained a constant companion during these journeys across the earth. This spread of cooking reflects the adaptability of human communities. The foods available in one region might differ greatly from those found in another. Plants that grow in cold climates may not resemble those that thrive in warmer regions. Animals hunted in open plains differ from those living within forests or along rivers. Yet the presence of fire allowed people to prepare a wide range of materials in ways that made them easier to consume. Heat softened plant tissues that might otherwise resist chewing. Animal meat exposed to warmth could separate more easily from bone. Through these transformations, cooking helped expand the variety of foods that human groups could incorporate into their diets. In this way, the hearth became a flexible tool that connected human bodies to many different ecosystems. Food gathered from unfamiliar landscapes could still be brought back to the fire and prepared in familiar ways. The warmth of embers and the steady glow of flame provided a consistent method for altering the texture of plants and animals collected from the surrounding environment. Even as the specific ingredients changed from one region to another, the process of cooking remained recognizable. This continuity may have helped human groups adapt to new environments during long migrations. When people entered unfamiliar territories, they encountered plants and animals they had never seen before. Some of these materials might have been difficult to chew or digest in their raw form. The presence of fire offered a way to experiment with these new resources. By placing them near heat, early humans could observe how their texture changed and whether they became easier to consume. Over time, such experimentation may have expanded the range of foods that supported human survival in diverse landscapes. The hearth therefore acted as more than a source of warmth or a place for gathering. It became a point of transformation where materials from the surrounding environment were gradually integrated into human life. Plants that once resisted chewing might soften under heat. Animal tissues might change in ways that made them easier to divide and share. Through these processes, the fire helped bridge the gap between unfamiliar ecosystems and the evolving nutritional needs of the human body. Archaeological sites across different continents reveal similar patterns. Even though the environments differ greatly, many sites contain traces of repeated fire use and materials altered by heat. These patterns suggest that the relationship between humans, fire, and food remained consistent as populations moved across the world. The specific foods may have changed, but the act of preparing them with fire continued to appear wherever people established living spaces. Over many thousands of years, this pattern allowed cooking to become one of the most widely shared human behaviors. Communities separated by vast distances developed their own traditions of preparing food, Yet many of those traditions still centered on the use of controlled heat. The hearth, in its many forms, remained a place where food gathered from the surrounding world was transformed before being eaten. If cooking helped human groups adapt to new environments by making a wider range of foods accessible, what might this suggest about the role of cooking in supporting the global spread of our species across the Earth? As human groups gradually moved across different regions of the Earth, the landscapes they encountered often presented unfamiliar challenges. Climate, vegetation, and animal life varied widely from one place to another. Some environments offered abundant plant foods during certain seasons, but became scarce during others. In colder regions, plant resources might be limited for long periods of the year, leaving animal foods as a more reliable source of nourishment. In coastal areas, the shoreline introduced new possibilities, such as fish and shellfish. Each environment required people to learn how to interact with the resources available to them. Cooking provided a consistent way to respond to these differences. The heat of a controlled fire could alter many types of food, allowing materials gathered in one environment to be prepared in ways similar to those used elsewhere. A root dug from the soil, a piece of meat from a hunted animal, or a shellfish collected along the coast could all be placed near the same source of warmth. Though the ingredients differed, the basic process of transformation remained recognizable. Heat softened tissues, changed textures, and made the materials easier to chew and swallow. This flexibility allowed human groups to experiment with foods that might otherwise have been difficult to use. A plant that seemed too tough when eaten raw might become manageable after exposure to warmth. Animal tissues that resisted chewing could soften when placed near embers. Even certain foods that contain natural compounds, making them unpleasant in their raw state, could sometimes change under heat in ways that reduced their bitterness or hardness. Through careful observation and repeated experience, people could gradually learn which materials responded well to cooking and which did not. Such learning likely occurred slowly as individuals tested different foods in the presence of fire. The hearth offered a stable place where these experiments could occur safely rather than encountering new foods only in the uncertain conditions of the open landscape. People could bring unfamiliar materials back to the fire, where they could watch how heat affected them. If the result proved easier to chew or digest, the food might become part of the group's regular diet. Over time, these discoveries could expand the range of foods that supported human life in each environment. Cooking also allowed people to process foods that required extended preparation. Some plant materials may have needed time near gentle heat before they softened enough to eat comfortably. The steady warmth of a maintained fire made such preparation possible. The group could remain near the hearth while the transformation occurred, allowing food to change gradually without constant attention. In this way, the hearth became a place where knowledge about food accumulated. Individuals observed the effects of heat, shared what they learned, and passed those practices to others across generations. This knowledge allowed communities to adapt to new landscapes with increasing confidence. The ability to prepare many different foods with fire helped reduce the risk associated with entering unfamiliar territory. Even when the environment offered materials that had not previously been part of the human diet, the presence of a hearth allowed those materials to be explored and understood through these quiet processes of experimentation and shared learning. Cooking may have supported the gradual expansion of human populations across the earth. As groups moved into new regions, the fire traveled with them, providing a familiar method for transforming the resources found there. If cooking helped early humans experiment with unfamiliar foods and adapt to new landscapes, how might this long partnership between fire and food have influenced the extraordinary range of environments that humans now inhabit? As human groups continued to move across the planet, the presence of fire and the habit of cooking helped create a bridge between unfamiliar environments and the needs of the human body. Landscapes differed widely in climate and resources. Some regions offered dense forests filled with plant life, while others were open grasslands where large animals moved across vast distances. Coastal areas introduced foods drawn from the sea, while colder northern territories required survival during long seasons when plant growth slowed. Despite these differences, the hearth remained a familiar point where materials from the surrounding environment could be transformed before they were eaten. This consistency may have played an important role in allowing humans to live in places that might otherwise have been difficult to inhabit. Raw food alone sometimes limits which materials can be used as nourishment. Tough plant tissues, fibrous roots, or dense animal muscles may require long periods of chewing or digestion before their energy becomes available to the body. When Maren softens these structures, some of those barriers are reduced. The transformation does not create new resources in the environment, but it can expand the range of foods that can be processed effectively by the human body.
This expansion becomes especially important when people enter landscapes where familiar foods are scarce. In such situations, the ability to prepare different materials using fire provides a form of flexibility. Plants that appear difficult to eat in their raw state may become manageable when placed near heat. Animal tissues that resist chewing can change in texture after exposure to warmth. Through careful observation, early human groups may have discovered that some foods responded well to cooking, while others remained unsuitable. These discoveries would gradually shape local traditions about which materials were gathered and how they were prepared. Over many generations, these practices allowed communities to develop diets suited to the environments in which they lived. In colder climates, cooking could make animal foods easier to consume and share. In regions rich with plant resources, heat might soften roots, seeds, or other plant tissues gathered from the soil or forest floor. Along coastal areas, fish and shellfish, placed near embers, could change in texture before being eaten. Though the specific ingredients differed across continents, the underlying process remained similar. The hearth provided warmth, light, and controlled heat that could alter food gathered from the surrounding landscape. Archaeological evidence from different parts of the world often reveals this recurring pattern. Sites separated by thousands of kilometers still show traces of repeated fire use and materials altered by heat. Ash layers, burned bones, and charred plant remains appear in many places where human groups once lived. These traces suggest that cooking remained closely linked to the spread of human populations across the earth. The ability to transform food through heat did not eliminate the challenges of living in unfamiliar environments. People still needed knowledge of local plants, animals, and seasonal changes. Yet, the presence of fire created a stable tool that could be applied in many different situations. It allowed early humans to approach new resources with curiosity and patience, testing how warmth might alter the materials they found. In this way, cooking became part of the quiet partnership between humans and the landscapes they entered. The fire connected distant ecosystems to the needs of the human body by transforming the materials gathered from those places. Over thousands of years, this partnership helped support the remarkable expansion of human populations across diverse climates and terrains. If cooking helped humans adapt to environments across the planet, what deeper meaning might this ancient practice still hold in the everyday meals that people prepare and share today? In the present day, cooking is so familiar that it rarely attracts attention. Meals are prepared in kitchens using tools designed specifically to control heat. Stoves, ovens, and other devices allow people to adjust temperature with precision, transforming ingredients drawn from farms, forests, rivers, and oceans. The act of cooking appears as a simple step within the routine of daily life. Yet, behind this ordinary habit lies a relationship between humans and fire that stretches across immense spans of time. Long before modern tools existed, Early humans learned to keep flames alive within small hearths on the ground. These fires provided warmth, light, and a steady source of heat that could alter the materials people gathered from their surroundings. Over countless evenings, beside those ancient flames, the transformation of food became a familiar part of human life. Cooking did not remain confined to one place or culture. As human groups moved across the earth, they carried the knowledge of fire with them. The hearth appeared in forests, along rivers, within open grasslands, and near coastlines where waves met the shore. Each environment offered different plants and animals. Yet, the act of placing food near controlled heat remained a recognizable practice. In this way, cooking became one of the most widely shared habits of the human species. Over generations, the practice of cooking gradually intertwined with many aspects of human life. It influenced the way food was gathered, how groups organized their daily activities, and how people gathered together at the end of the day. The hearth became a place where warmth and nourishment met within the same circle of light. Around it, individuals spoke, shared food, and passed knowledge from one generation to the next. These repeated gatherings helped transform cooking from a practical technique into a cultural tradition. Even today, traces of that ancient structure remain visible. People still gather in kitchens and dining areas to prepare and share meals. Families and communities come together around food that has been transformed through heat. Though the flames are now contained within modern appliances, the basic relationship remains similar to the one that existed around the earliest hearths. Food from the surrounding world is brought into a shared space, altered by warmth, and then distributed among those present. This continuity suggests that cooking is not merely a method of preparing food, it is also part of a deeper pattern in human life. The act of transforming raw materials into nourishment through heat connects the environment to the body and connects individuals to one another. Each meal represents a small moment within that long chain of relationships. The plants and animals of the landscape provide the materials. Fire alters their structure. Human bodies absorb the energy released through digestion, and the people gathered around the meal share the experience together. When viewed across the immense span of human history, cooking can be understood as one of the quiet practices that helped shape the human story. It altered how food interacted with the body, how groups gathered around a common place, and how people adapted to new environments as they moved across the earth. The simple act of placing food near heat gradually became a defining feature of human life. If this ancient habit has accompanied humans from the earliest hearths to the modern kitchen, what might it reveal about the unique way our species continues to transform the world around it in order to survive? When a person prepares a meal today, the process often appears simple and routine. Ingredients are gathered, heat is applied, and the food gradually changes until it is ready to eat. The transformation may occur within a few minutes on a stove or over a longer time inside an oven. Yet beneath this familiar sequence lies a process that connects the present moment to a long history of interaction between humans, fire, and the natural world. Every cooked meal represents the continuation of a relationship that began when early humans first learned to keep flames alive and place food near their warmth. The foods used today may differ greatly from those available in ancient environments. Modern agriculture provides grains, vegetables, and animals raised in carefully managed systems. Trade allows ingredients from distant regions to appear in kitchens around the world. Despite these changes, the underlying principle of cooking remains the same. Heat alters the structure of food, making it easier to chew, digest, and share within a social setting. This process still echoes the quiet transformations that occurred beside the earliest hearths. Cooking also continues to shape the way people gather together. In many households and communities, meals mark moments when individuals pause from their daily tasks and share time with others. Food prepared through heat becomes the center of these gatherings. Plates are passed across the table, conversations unfold, and the meal becomes a shared experience rather than an isolated act of eating. These patterns reflect the same social rhythms that may have developed long ago around the glow of a fire. The connection between cooking and human cooperation remains visible even beyond this household. In many cultures, the preparation of food involves multiple people working together. One person may prepare ingredients, another may tend the heat, and others may divide and serve the finished meal. These cooperative actions resemble the shared attention that early humans may have given to maintaining fire and preparing food near the hearth. Though the tools have changed, the pattern of shared responsibility continues. Cooking also reminds people of their connection to the environments that provide the materials for each meal. Plants draw energy from sunlight as they grow, animals feed on plants, or other animals within the same ecosystems. When humans gather these resources and apply heat to transform them, the energy stored in those materials becomes accessible to the body. Each meal, therefore, represents a link between the landscape and the biological processes that sustain human life. In this way, cooking serves as a quiet reminder of the relationship between humans and the natural world. Fire stands between these two realms. It transforms the raw materials of the environment into forms that the body can more easily use. The flame does not create the energy contained within food, but it helps release that energy in ways that support the complex systems of the human body. This relationship has remained stable across thousands of years, even as human societies have grown larger and more technologically advanced. Modern kitchens may contain devices that produce heat through electricity or gas, rather than open flames. Yet, the essential act remains recognizable. Food is placed near controlled heat, and its structure changes before it is eaten. The transformation that once occurred beside ancient embers now takes place within carefully designed tools. But the underlying process continues to link human life with the natural materials from which nourishment is drawn. If cooking continues to connect people, environments, and the energy contained within food, what might this long tradition reveal about the deeper relationship between human survival and the ability to transform the world through knowledge and cooperation? Across the long arc of human history, the act of cooking has remained quietly present beside many of the changes that shaped our species. Tools evolved, environments shifted, and societies grew more complex. Yet the simple practice of placing food near controlled heat continued to accompany human life. From the earliest hearths built with stones on open ground to the carefully designed kitchens of the present day, the transformation of food through warmth has remained one of the most stable habits shared across cultures. This continuity suggests that cooking is more than a technique. It is part of the deeper relationship between humans and the environment that supports them. Every cooked meal begins with materials drawn from the natural world. Plants grow through sunlight, soil, and water. Animals move through ecosystems sustained by those same plants or by other animals. When humans gather these resources and apply heat, the materials change in ways that allow the body to use their stored energy. Fire becomes the bridge between the living landscape and the biological systems that sustain human life. Through this transformation, cooking links the outside world with the interior processes of digestion, growth, and thought. At the same time, cooking connects individuals with one another. Meals prepared through heat are rarely eaten in complete isolation. People gather around tables, kitchens, fires, or shared spaces where food is divided and enjoyed together. The act of cooking invites cooperation, patience, and attention. Someone gathers the ingredients, someone tends the heat, and others wait until the food is ready. These small acts mirror patterns that may have formed long ago around ancient hearths, where groups watched the flame and waited as food slowly softened beside the embers. In this sense, cooking reflects a combination of qualities that are deeply characteristic of human life. It requires observation of how materials change under heat. It requires patience as the transformation unfolds over time. It often involves cooperation among individuals who share both the effort and the reward of the meal. These qualities appear again and again across the long story of the human species. The practice of cooking therefore stands as a quiet example of how knowledge shared across generations can shape the way a species interacts with the world around it. The question of why humans are the only animals that cook food may not have a single answer that a stands alone. Instead, it emerges from many small changes that unfolded across deep time: the ability to maintain fire, the patience to observe its effects, the willingness to share knowledge, and the habit of gathering around a common place. All contributed to a relationship with heat that no other species developed in the same way. Through these gradual steps, cooking became woven into the fabric of human existence. Even now, when flames are often hidden inside modern devices rather than visible in open hearths, the process remains familiar. Food is placed near controlled heat, its structure changes, and the meal is shared. This ordinary act quietly echoes countless evenings when early humans gathered around fire and watched the same transformation unfold. Perhaps the deeper meaning of cooking lies not only in the food it produces, but in the pattern it reveals. Humans are a species that observes the world, learns from it, and gradually transforms it in ways that support survival. Fire, once a force encountered in the wild landscape, became part of that transformation. And through it, food itself became something that humans reshape before it becomes nourishment. If cooking represents this long partnership between knowledge, cooperation, and the natural world, the question remains gently open. What other quiet transformations might still be shaping the future of the human story